As Marcy's in the room. Perfect. The recording is in progress. We will begin. Marcy is in the house. Great. We'll look. I wanted to warmly welcome everyone to the 2023 Alliance for Malaria Prevention Partners meeting. It's wonderful to be together. And maybe if I could have everyone's attention. So colleagues over there, if we could just, we're just going to start our meeting. So if we could just have a moment for introductions. There's an extra seat there if you need a chair. Good. So look, again, I wanted to warmly welcome everyone to the Alliance for Malaria Prevention 2023 Partners meeting. I think there's a number of important markers as we start. This is our first face-to-face meeting in 2 years. So it is excellent to see each of you, to be able to shake hands and hug and touch each other. It's also our first meeting on the African continent, which is something we have wanted to do for the last decade. That's an enormous accomplishment. It's our first hybrid meeting, and it's the meeting with the largest participation to date, with a mix of both people in this room and people joining online. So those are enormous accomplishments. And then finally, it's the meeting with the largest participation with countries with a disease burden. So that is something we have always worked towards. So again, a number of really important firsts as we kick off this first face-to-face meeting in 2 years. What I wanted to do is I'm going to pass the phone to someone who's been essential in delivering this meeting. I'm going to pass the phone to Oriane, who's standing at the back, and she's just going to run through a few housekeeping issues quickly.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Ravi de vous rencontrer aujourd'hui. Alors, donc juste, Jim, if you can move the slide, please. Donc, nous allons être pendant ces 2 jours dans cette grande salle de réunion, Almaty, donc au 4e étage. Sur ce même étage, vous avez les toilettes qui sont juste après les ascenseurs. Je suis ici. Il y a un espace extérieur, si jamais, où vous pouvez aller, une petite terrasse. Et ce soir, à partir de 18 h, pour les personnes intéressées, on organise une réception qui sera au Poolside Garden, donc juste en bas au 2e étage, à côté de la piscine. Oh, I just realized I'm speaking in French, sorry. So you have interpretation, obviously working. So everyone has headphones and a receiver on the table. So channel 1 is for English, channel 2 is for French. You can adjust the volume on the left and the channel on the right. If there is any issue and it's not working, just let me or any technical person in the room know, and we will change your receiver. The Wi-Fi, so you can connect to the Accor Wi-Fi, and you can just enter your email address to kind of access the Wi-Fi from the hotel today. If there is, I think that's it for the housekeeping, but of course, if there is any question, any issues today and tomorrow, just let me know. I will be sitting here, and yeah, just come to see me and we will kind of work together on that. Thank you so much and welcome everyone.
Thank you once again, Oriane. Just wanted to give Oriane a warm thank you for all the organization. And then just a few additional housekeeping issues. This phone was left at reception, so if it's your phone, you can just pop up and grab it. And then in addition, we will be getting extension cords out for the table. So a number of people have asked if they can plug in. So I think over the course of the day, we'll put extension cords out so people can plug in. We normally now would pass the microphone and do self-introductions, but there's so many people in the room, we thought we would just, I'd ask the country teams to stand up. So I'm just going to read through the country teams that are here. And if you could just stand up and wave. So the team from Benin. If you could stand and wave, that's great. The team from Côte d'Ivoire. Okay, the team from Chad. Welcome. The team from, I'm just going to run these. The team from Ghana. Team from Zambia. The team from Togo. The team from Sierra Leone. The team from Gabon. The team from Mauritania. The team from Kenya. The team from Uganda. Good. And if I can ask the team to Uganda just to stay standing, we have an important announcement. Dr. Jimmy is celebrating his 2 times 25 years old birthday today. So happy birthday, Jimmy. It's great you're with us. The team from Mozambique. The team from Tanzania. The team from Zanzibar. The team from Madagascar. The team from Pakistan. The team from Liberia. Team from DRC. The team from Nigeria. Okay. Team from Senegal. And then the team from Guinea. Good. And have I missed any country? Team from Guinea, welcome. Have I missed any country teams in that set of welcomes? No? The next step, I just wanted, I think most of you know members of the AMP core group, but if I could just ask the members of the AMP core group to stand up, kind of wave their hand. So this is that group that organizes this meeting and a number of things. And so I wanted to thank them also for their work. So look, quite quickly then, over the next 2 days, we will hear presentations from 12 different country teams. We were discussing with Marcy last night. She's kind of still working on the final reporting for 2022, but it's really an incredible accomplishment. 191 million ITNs were distributed across 35 countries, which is an enormous accomplishment achieved by many of the people in this room and the countries in this room. So congratulations on that. And sitting where I sit in the Health and Care Department in Geneva at IFRC, you see so many programs that have backslid or had significant losses due to the pandemic. And I think it's a testament to the people in this room, to the work you've done, that you've been able to keep campaigns on track and keep BedNets distributed. So once again, congratulations. The final point here, it's very nice. I've heard already a few country teams are saying next year we're having the meeting in our country. So that's a wonderful, it was the Pakistan team actually that, perfect. So we may be in Islamabad this time next year. So it's wonderful to be together. So look, I just wanted to check. Joseph is here, wonderful. I wanted to welcome Joseph Lanani from the director. He's the director of the Preventative and Promotive Health Services from the Kenyan National Malaria Control Program. So Dr. Joseph, if you just wanted to come up and welcome us, and we have your speaking notes here. There's the mic.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Good morning again. Welcome to Kenya. So my name is Patrick Mburugo, working for the Ministry of Health in the Division of Communicable Diseases and heading the Vector Control Program. So we are privileged to have visitors across the globe, and we are happy to host you in Kenya for this very important meeting, the first Alliance for Malaria Prevention Partners meeting in Africa. We are very happy to have been considered as the host country in Africa. So without wasting much time, we are privileged this morning to have with us the Director of Promotive and Preventive Health Services in the Ministry of Health, who happens also to be my boss. And I will be glad to welcome him to give some opening remarks. Initially, I was the one to give the opening remarks, but when I found that he's around, I said, you cannot override your boss. So this morning, therefore, I'm privileged and honored to present to you Dr. Joseph Lanani, who is the Director of Promotive and Preventive Health Services in the Ministry of Health, Kenya. Most welcome, Dr.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, the great team, the Alliance for Malaria Prevention. As introduced, my name is Dr. Joseph Lenai. This is the Director of Preventive and Promotive Health Services in this country. Welcome to this great country, Kenya. Good morning. Bonjour. Ça va? Thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Ministry of Health, my Cabinet Secretary, my Principal Secretary, my Director General, and also on behalf of the Kenyan government and the larger Kenyan populace. One, to welcome you, as alluded by Patrick. We are very, very grateful that the first Alliance meeting is being held in Kenya. And we still want to say that even the second and the third and the fourth, kindly hold them here. Let Kenya be the center for the Alliance meetings. We are very hospitable, and we have a lot of good things also to offer. And there is also a lot to learn from the Kenya initiative in terms of malaria interventions. So without much ado, allow me to give my opening remarks to this great alliance. Good morning and a warm welcome to Kenya. It's a great honor for our country and the Ministry of Health to host the very first annual Alliance Malaria Prevention Partners meeting to convene on the African continent. This gathering of country program health experts and partners now comes to the region of the world where malaria continues to pose a public health and socioeconomic threat. 3/4 of the population are at risk of infection, and older children aged 10 to 14 years have the highest prevalence at 11%. More important, the burden of the disease varies across the country. That decision itself is a confirmation that AMP's steadfast commitment to support countries like Kenya to promote ITN distribution and use on large scale. Kenya is no stranger to championing ITN distribution through massnet campaigns. Since 2011, our ministry has adopted WHO's recommendation of achieving and maintaining universal coverage through campaign every 3 years. From the 10.6 million nets distributed to all populations in endemic and epidemic regions in 2011 to 2012, through our last successful campaign conducted in the throes of pandemic, Kenya's efforts have borne fruit. Those campaigns contributed to a nationwide reduction in malaria prevalence from 8% in 2015 to 6% in 2020, as measured by Malaria Indicator Service. And you do know the country, Kenya, received an award in African Union on the scorecard for malaria. So let's clap for Kenya. Our country is not resting on its efforts to sustain the gains achieved and to further attribute to effective malaria vector control in the country. We are preparing for the next year's campaign to distribute over 18 million nets in 28 counties. This time, we will apply lessons from previous campaigns to strengthen our strategies, which are use of digital platform for household registration, net distribution processes, and supporting mobile payments, expand the role of Kenya Medical Supplies Authority to deliver nets up to the beneficiaries or consumers. These changes will address risks encountered in ITN storage and transportation, expedite payments for campaign participants, and increase the quality and visibility of registration and redistribution processes. The timing and location of the AMP meeting couldn't be better for Kenya as we prepare for our 2024 MassNet campaign. Given the meeting's theme of tailoring and prioritizing ITN interventions, our malaria and vector control programs will significantly tap into participants' expertise and experience on such themes as streamlining and distribution process from the ITN user's perspective, given past challenges with the logistics, improving the payment mechanism to community health promoters, using surveillance efficiently and strategically to ensure the impact of ITN distribution on malaria prevention, and apply best practices for ensuring data quality to inform policy decisions, including the use of digital platforms. We thank AMP's hosts and the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies in Geneva, along with IFRC's Africa Regional Office right here in Nairobi, for allowing us to welcome you to Kenya. We wish you fruitful deliberations and enjoyable stay in Kenya. Karibuni sana, and God bless you all.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. I'd like to call on Laurent Manakuna from IFRC's Africa Regional Office, and this office has given us enormous support in organizing this meeting. So Laurent's just going to welcome us today from IFRC.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everyone. My name is Laurian Rugambwa Bwanakunu. I'm sitting in for Regional Director for International Federation of Africa, based here in Nairobi. And my full-time job, I'm the Regional Head for Humanitarian Diplomacy in Africa. First of all, let me also echo what my colleagues have said. Welcome to Nairobi. And for those of you who are coming from outside the continent, welcome to Africa. So I have a written speech, and I'll notes very briefly in 2 minutes, so I will be out of your way. But I would like to read it so that the translator can follow what I'm trying to convey to you. It's very nice to see so many AMP partners back together after 2 years of organizing the AMP annual partners meeting virtually. It's excellent to see that the meeting is being organized on the African continent for the first time since the AMP partnership was formed in 2008. This is an impressive public-private partnership that has a great deal to be proud of. Hundreds of millions of insecticide-treated nets are distributed each year through the mass campaign and continuous distribution channels to achieve and sustain malaria prevention targets. And in many cases, AMP is engaged with national malaria programs and partners to provide support. More than 122 partners working on malaria prevention and control are present in this room, as well as joining us virtually. Some of us are joining us virtually. Also, it is impressive to have representatives of National Malaria Program from 25 countries present with firsthand experience with the successes and challenges that will be discussed over the coming 2 days. As progress against malaria has stalled in many countries, enhanced effort to ensure effective interventions are delivered to all populations at risk and will be needed to get the fight against malaria back on track. In 2022, AMP continued to coordinate partners, develop operational guidance based on interactive learning, and provide country support based on requests from programs and partners. Approximately 108 million ATNs were distributed through mass campaign in 2022, representing almost 80% of ATN planned for campaign distribution during the year. This is an enormous success by the national malaria programs and their partners to ensure that all population at risk have access to malaria prevention. As the global malaria community approaches 3 billion ATNs procured and shipped to countries based on net mapping project data, it is clear that an enhanced focus on waste management and end-of-life nets should be a priority. This year's AMP Partners meeting is focused on several important topics. 1, results from the new NETS project and lesson learned for future planning. 2, approaches and quantification for subnational tailoring of ATNs, and an important issue given the resource constraint that many national programs are facing for implementation of their national strategic plans. 3, improving planning, measurement, outcomes, and availability of data for decision-making. 4, ATN performance and quality and post-market monitoring. The AMP Partners meeting will be followed by the meeting focused on campaign digitalization, which presents an enormous opportunity for country sharing and learning, for discussion about gaps in solutions to common problems, and for further thinking about integrated campaign digitalization. I would like to acknowledge the critical role that the community health workforce, which includes community health workers, trained volunteers, and community-based organization, has played in making this a success story by ensuring access to health commodities for most remote, hard-to-reach communities, and promoting health through behavioral change communication. More effort needs to be made to strengthen community delivery channels, particularly in the face of increased insecurity in many countries. My experience tells me the strength of AMP comes from the number and diversity of partners in this room, knowing that the strength of our individual organizations are enhanced through working together. The solution to global problem is found in multi-stakeholder alliance between governments, private sector, and civil society. Congratulations. Your collective work is an example of the power of partnership. I wish you all the very productive meeting. And once again, take your time to visit Nairobi when you are here and enjoy your meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lorian. I'd like to invite Dr. Emmanuel Chanda from WHO Afro. He will be our first presenter today. And Dr. Emmanuel will be presenting on malaria and vector control solutions with focus on ITNs from the World Malaria Report. So over to Dr. Emmanuel. And you can advance the slide, this, or you can ask if you want. Yeah. Just point it here too. So if you point, see the, and that one goes back and forth.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As introduced, my name is Emmanuel Chanda. Thank you. So I work for WHO Regional Office for Africa as a vector-borne disease control officer, and I'm responsible for implementing integrated vector management in the context of the global vector control response. So I'm so happy today to be attending this meeting. It's my very first time to attend the AMP meeting. And today I'll be just giving you highlights from the World Malaria Report 2022 on malaria vector control, particularly on ITNs. So my presentation is structured as reflected. I'll talk about disease and vector control, and then briefly just some hints on vector control products. This is an area that colleagues from IVCC will look at. And then I'll also talk on highlights relating to distribution and coverage of nets, as well as access and use of ITNs. Then I'll talk about biological and other threats to the use of ITNs, and crown it all with, again, just a hint on disruptions during the COVID-19. Never mind the cloudness of the slide, but I just want to highlight a few things here. Just a reminder to say vector-borne diseases do contribute slightly over 17% of the burden to communicable diseases. And as such, about 80% of the global population is at risk. And this results in excess of 700,000 deaths annually. And malaria does contribute much to this. So in order to combat this challenge, WHO urges countries to implement an integrated vector management approach. Basically, this is a rational decision-making process to facilitate optimal use of available resources. And it has 5 key elements: advocacy, social mobilization and legislation, including regulation. And then it looks at evidence-based approach. It also considers integration of interventions and across diseases and tools. It also looks at collaboration within and across sectors. And then it highlights aspects of capacity building. So WHO does recommend that countries implement integrated vector control when it comes to vector control issues. And the current recommendations around malaria vector control are well articulated in the guidelines for malaria control. And there are 2 key interventions that are supported by WHO, and these are insecticide-treated nets, as well as indoor residual spray. But their implementation should be guided by thorough information from the local situation. And it should be noted that products that are used should always be pre-qualified by WHO. These interventions should be supplemented where amenable by other tools, such as larval source management, as well as personal protection interventions. Over the years, it's been identified to say IVM as it is hasn't really yielded the envisioned outcomes because of lack of or minimal uptake. So WHO through WHA, World Health Assembly, did develop the Global Vector Control Response, which strives to strengthen vector control through increased capacity, surveillance, coordination, as well as integration across diseases and sectors. But the take home here is that when it comes to malaria control, vector control has contributed a lot. And we have seen reduction in terms of the numbers of countries that have actually eliminated the disease. Between 2000 and 2021, we have seen a reduction from 108 to 84 countries. And then numbers also that are reported, less than 10 indigenous malaria cases have increased from 4 in 2000 to 25 in 2021. And this is marked progress. But you will realize from the global malaria report that there is some good progress in terms of malaria case incidence from 2000 all the way up to 2021, although the decline has been very, very dismal when it comes to the last 3 years. We have seen the case incidence increasing from 2017 to 2020 and through to 2021. The same applies with the malaria mortality rates, which have reduced from 30 to about 15 between 2000 and 2015. And also, again, there was a slight increase in 2017. But overall, what we have seen in the 2022 report is that 29 countries have actually contributed to about 96% of malaria cases, and mostly coming from four countries that contribute up to half of the burden. The same also is the picture that you see in terms of deaths, just to shed a little bit more light on that. And then talking about vector control products, it's clear that WHO and partners are making efforts to ensure that the toolbox for the products is increased. And the Global Observatory on Health and Research lists quite a number of vector control products. But to note here is that the good proportion is actually ascribed to ITNs. About 39% of these products are ITNs, and there are other products that are at different levels of development. And then IVCC has also been doing a lot of work in this area, and they have also contributed so much to the development of new products. But I won't dwell so much on this. My colleague will talk about this much. But just to indicate, to say the toolbox for vector control is increasing to ensure that other threats beyond resistance, including outdoor biting, are taken care of. So in terms of distribution, you notice that there a lot of nets that's, sorry. All right, I'm so sorry for that. So you notice that a lot of nets that were distributed actually went to sub-Saharan Africa from industry, as well as those distributed by malaria control programs. But we should note that between 2004 and 2021, almost 2.5 billion nets were supplied globally. And out of these, 2.2 billion came to sub-Saharan Africa. And in 2021, 220 million nets were delivered to endemic countries. To note is that 46% were pyrethroid PBO nets, and 9% were dual active ITNs. And when we look at population level indicators on household indicators, we have seen progress in a number of indicators. For example, households with at least one net has increased from 5% to 68% between 2000 and 2021. Households owning at least one net has also, for every 2 people, has also increased from 1% to 38%. And access to at least an ITN within households has increased from 3% to 54%. The same is seen in terms of population indicators on use. we have seen 2 to 47% in the same period for the entire population, as well as 3 to 53% for children aged under 5. And again, the same for pregnant women. Overall, access to the use of ITNs, like I did indicate earlier in that slide, remains below the levels observed in 2017. So again here, this is just to depict what the nets that have been planned and nets that were planned and distributed, and those that are yet to be distributed, just to reflect them in a pictorial form, as well as also the indicators of population-based access to be, just to represent them in a graphic form. You realize to say 2017, we did so very well on use as well as access. So 2020 up to 2021, we still lagging behind, and that calls for more efforts. So ITNs have been credited to have contributed much to the reduction of the burden as well as transmission, particularly in settings with moderate to high transmission of malaria. And as such, ITNs remain one of the most favored vector control tool by WHO. And we encourage and urge countries to continue using these interventions. However, we all know to say there are factors that may compromise and do compromise effectiveness of this intervention. And just to group them, these factors relate to physical durability of the nets, as well as chemical durability, operational, as well as behavioral constraints, and aspects relating to the vector, not forgetting pyrethroid resistance, which has been a worrying threat, but discussions are still ongoing, and there has been different aspects that have been fronted in terms of resistance. Just to highlight a few things, like the multi-country study indicated that nets can still protect despite presence of resistance. However, experimental studies have also indicated to say, as resistance increases in a population of mosquitoes, then again, the repellent and mortality effects do decline. Modeling has also indicated that the epidemiological impact is much reduced at high levels of resistance. So there is need for much work to go into this area. And again, work on new generation nets have demonstrated that there is a difference when you compare with pyrethroid only nets. So there is need to improve actions in terms of effectiveness of ITNs, and this should be in the areas of improving durability, improving allocation of efficiency, and in this regard, we need to improve the digitization so that we don't just depend on census data, and then also improving the retention of nets as well as the use. But insecticide resistance management approaches and development of new tools that mitigate resistance would be critical. Again, here it's just to highlight the diminishing rates of ITNs in different countries. You realize to say that countries nets deplete in terms of either physical durability at different rates. So this is just showing the model that looked at different countries. The red bars there indicate the confidence interval, and then you should note that all the red items had less than 3 surveys considered. So you have a net life of between 1 to 2.7 years, but the overall, if you aggregate everything, you get 1.9 as the average. Again, here, if we are to look at the impact of ITL's use as relates to operational and behavioral constraints in sub-Saharan Africa, it's very clear that if an ideal situation, which is shown in blue, is to be strived towards, we need to take care of other parameters that are actually compromising the net use. The other biological aspects relates to insecticide resistance, as well as the invasive species. So for insecticide resistance, pyrethroid resistance does compromise the efficacy, and it has been detected in a lot of countries. Although I'll hasten to mention here to say the scale and distribution of this per country varies, but it's an area that we need to make sure that we up our game in terms of monitoring and managing insecticide resistance. The same relates to the invasive vector Anopheles stephensi, which is likely to actually herald more outbreaks, and its detection in Africa is continuing. We recently had Nigeria reporting, and then Kenya followed, and Ghana recently. So we'll need to ensure that we take into consideration these biological threats. And then again, this slide is just to highlight what the implications could be if we allow those behavioral challenges as well as operational challenges to take toll. So this model, again, is just showing an ideal situation from 1 to 4 there, and a realistic situation where if we continue adding, for example, the top one there is an ideal situation where everything is met in terms of access, distribution, use, and all. You will always have high levels of impact. But the moment we start negating in terms of other aspects, we are reducing the life of a net or the effectiveness of a net up to year 3. So that again is just showing that, and it's well explained on the right-hand side. Yeah, so just to crown it all, I think it's important also to note to say a lot has been done from the malaria community in terms of combating transmission using nets, but our efforts have been masked by the disruptions that were due to COVID. Between the 2019 and 2021, data indicates that 13.4 million cases and 63,000 deaths were attributable to this aspect. And then 46 countries distributed. 46 countries Okay, sorry for that. 46 countries distributed 74% of the 272 million ITNs that were planned during 2020 campaigns. So you can see so it's very clear. In 2021, while a total of 171 million nets were planned, only 75% were distributed. And then we had countries that distributed less than 60% and countries that did not distribute at all, which is really a concern. Countries like Uganda and Nigeria distributed 53% to 26% respectively. So that marks the end of this discussion. I thought I should just end it with a reminder of the COVID-19 and just to urge everybody to say we are on good course, but we need to do more. Thank you.
You sit up here, we can take questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Emmanuel. So now I would like to invite Anna Ursu from Innovative Vector Control Consortium. Ioana will present on new vector control products, market outlook, and pipeline. So you can flick this back and forth. That's the point.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hujambo. Bonjour à tout le monde. Thank you for having us here. Thank you to the Kenyan team. Thank you to AMP, and also particular thanks actually to Marcy, because she has managed to keep us all together through the COVID pandemic. I think all of us have been on those calls on Wednesdays. Thank you so much. So I was asked actually to present a bit on the pipeline, and Emmanuel just mentioned it. So I'll get over the nerves at some point. I'm also Latin and I speak with my hands, which is going to be very difficult for the people online. So let's move on. Wow. Okay. So this is the pipeline as we have envisaged it, not just from us, but actually from all of our partners. So we've tried to put together not just our pipeline, but also the partners, but also our colleagues from MMV. So everything related to prevention, which is the pink at the bottom, as well as the vaccines, which are in red. And then in blue, you see the nets. In yellow is IRS and special repellents. And then in green, in the middle of it, we actually have the ATSBs coming in. So first and foremost, we're finalizing the IRS. As you see, we're coming to the end of it, and more blue is coming in. So more nets are coming through by 2025, 2026. We're starting to have them in. We're looking at new AIs, and just to confirm, because everyone asked, yes, it will be at Enebenanet. So what we have seen in Vector 2500 will be on a net, hopefully in the next 2 years. We also have the RTSS vaccine that was approved recently, and now it's being rolled out. And we're hoping to see the Matrix R21 by 2027. These years do take into consideration 1 year from PQ submission. So if PQ takes longer, those timelines will also slide. Also highlighting over there that we're hoping to have quite a few of SPAQs and different manufacturers coming through by 2025. And we're also hoping to see the ivermectin and also the monoclonal antibodies potentially coming by 2028. Of course, we're also hoping for gene drives by 2030, but let's see what the foundation says about that. So long story short, the pipeline is starting to be crowded, which is great. It means we finally have various tools to layer. So that's the great news. The bad news is that the pipeline is starting to be crowded and we have a lot of tools to layer. So I said because of the crowd here, and we're all working quite a bit of nets, to present you a bit how we see the forecast for the net volumes in the next few years in sub-Saharan Africa. The numbers are coming from the GI global malaria forecasting, where you might know probably that IVCC is providing the data and we're working on the vector control part. So first takeaway, if you're looking at the blue line over there, on average, we're no longer looking at 200 million nets in sub-Saharan Africa. We're way past that. The first takeaway is that we are now looking at something like 250 million nets on average annually being procured in sub-Saharan Africa alone. Then the second message, when we're looking at the market size, specifically for 2022, what was procured, we have spent globally $610 million just last year alone on nets. That's a lot. It also means that when we're looking at, so that was spent, by the way, for something like 260 million nets last year alone. It's always like that at the end of the year. You always see this kind of like end of cycle by the for the Global Fund. We see countries procuring because they're also preparing for campaigns, but also if there's any budget left over, they try to procure as much as possible. But as it is, we're already at 260. Also worth mentioning, what you see in purple are the dual AI, the way we see them moving forward. What you see in green is what we think for the PBO market is going to evolve. And as you can imagine, the red is the standard at the bottom and it's coming down. I would like to highlight the fact that if you're looking already at 2022 data, the purple and the green represent already 60% of the market. So that means that in more than 60% of the areas of sub-Saharan Africa, we have resistance to pyrethroids, and that's only going to increase. Nothing new for anyone here in this room, but the numbers are also confirming it. We're also assuming that that trend will continue. That's to be expected. However, as you see, the PBOs are not disappearing as fast from the market. And that has to do with two things. One, the PBO, the cheapest PBO on the market is still roughly at $220, whereas the dual tend to be in the $280 per unit. So that will still maintain the PBOs there. And however, we're still expecting that the PBO will drop out quite fast by the end of the decade. Not just the price, but also the issue of resistance to PBO, which is likely going to come through, but also the issue of durability. And I know this is going to be touched upon tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. Now, what does that mean specifically? If we're looking practically in 5 years' time, we need to have an alternative to chlorfenapyr nets. So by 2027, 2028, we need to have something else to rotate with, because between the green and the purple, we're already at 70–80% of the market. So that's a lot of the market that will need to be rotated. Otherwise, we're going to start seeing resistance to the already existing classes. Well, how difficult is it to bring a new AI into the market for a net? And I thought I would bring you something that we haven't really presented up till now, but a lot of people are asking us about, which is how difficult was it to bring the chlorfenapyr nets into the market and how much did it cost? Our partners are laughing. So let's start with the beginning. On the left-hand side, you have the prices. At the bottom, roughly the production capacity per year. So if at the beginning, for something like 5 million nets produced, the price of the dual AI at launch of the new nets project was about above $450, depending on the bed size net, and also the price of the PBOs back then, which were roughly at 10 million sold per year, was around $350. We had to bring in $70 million on top of the 520 on average. We had to bring another 70 million, out of which half went into the evidence generation to justify and to explain and for the WHO guidelines on the introduction of the dual AI nets. And then the other half went into volume guarantees and co-payments to support the countries. And I'm going to discuss about that in a second. Long story short, countries were paying a subsidized price, which is what the Global Fund and the PMI price were paying, whereas the difference was then covered through this co-payment that you see at the top. By the time we've reached 25 million nets production, our partners did, we finally came to the end of the NNP 3 years later. We anticipated 4, we reached it earlier. And the price came down to the $3 mark that we know right now. Meanwhile, also the PBOs increased. So most of the manufacturers currently producing PBOs, they're looking at roughly 25 million, if not more, production per year. And as a result, that price also came down. As we've seen, the PBOs last year represented some 120 million, 130 million of the procurement. So that did mean that the price of the generic PBO, if you want to call it, the cheapest, has now been able to make it to a $2.20, $2.40. Mind you, that's still above the pyrethroid net. The $2 net, I don't think it's feasible in today's day and age. A bit more information about the market intervention, because I promised I would. How does it work? We had to put this because we got a lot of questions over the past few months, and I thought it's a good time to present it. The idea was to bring together everyone and to create a three-pronged approach. One, on the demand side, we provided a co-payment to the countries. In other words, the country paid, like I said, a subsidized price, and the difference was paid to the manufacturers to cover for that difference. You see the purple line dotted versus the purple line continuous to see how the price came down. The green is the PBO price so that you can compare it. On the supply side, we had a volume guarantee with our partners, whereby we guaranteed volumes per year up to certain levels, and then those volumes were linked to certain prices. So as the volumes increased, the price was coming down. We also had to have an agreement on that price, on how it's coming down, at which points. It required quite a few partners to align. We had obviously our manufacturing partners, the BASF and the DCT, who are also present here. We also had the funding partners. So the part for the co-payments and the volume guarantee came from the Global Fund, UNITAID, and MedAccess and Gates Foundation. And then for the evidence generation, the other 30 million was paid by the Global Funds and the Gates Foundation as a top-up, including Wellcome Trust in Tanzania. For the evidence partners, you see them, we had a lot. First and foremost, most of you, or a lot of you in this room, have actually been involved in the evidence generation. And then we also had our partners from LSTM, LSH, PATH, Imperial College, together with everyone else in the country, as you can see, and of course the Tulane group doing right now the cost effectiveness analysis at the end. We also had our implementation partners, PSI and AMP, thank you again, and then we were the coordinators of it all. It was not an easy task. We've managed to get it through nicely by the end of it, but just to show you how much effort was required for one product. One net. If we come back to the, sorry, I'm just going to go quickly back here, not very smart. If we come back to this slide, if it took 70 million for one product alone, how much will it take us to get all of this pipe through? Yeah. Okay, so we also have early signs of budget pressure. We finished the co-payments, the support through the New Nets project in 2021. By middle of 2022, we were wrapping up. So the Global Fund took over and continues through what was called the Nets Transition Initiative. But that is also finalized now, and that funding is finished. So as that funding finished, the difference in price between the standard nets, which is, let's say, $1.94, $2, and now the dual AIs, which are in the $2.60 to $2.80 per unit, did mean that the IRS market is coming down. So countries are feeling the pressure. They're trying to put as many units as they can. even if they put a PBO, which let's say it's slightly cheaper or the same as a dual currently for some of them, countries are struggling to get the money. And we have that confirmed into what we're seeing already into where this year alone, we had quite a bit of a drop between 7 million, which was last year, units of IRS being sprayed to roughly 5 million this year alone. That is going to create a problem, but like I said, when we start thinking how we're going to layer our tools, the budget will really become an issue. So, conclusions. The toolbox is expanding. So like I said, the good news is that we're closer than ever to getting up to a potential malaria-free world. But that's not going to come cheap. So that's the bad news. None of the new AI nets are likely able to sustain a $2 per unit price. So if we're looking at more than, like I said, right now, 250 million nets procured per year, that money needs to come from somewhere. Is it coming by sacrificing the other ones, or do we get smarter in how we're going to use our resources? Do we start layering up? Do we start considering what we should be using where? And I think this is a question for everyone in the room, and you will know the answer better than I do. The potential acceleration of resistance will likely require changes in implementation. And I think this is what we're going to see throughout these next 2 days. Different nets, different levels of coverage, in different parts of the country, but also how do we combine it with SNC? How do we combine it with IRS? How do we combine it with vaccines? There remains the challenge of relatively low durability of PBO nets, and I know a lot of manufacturers are currently working on solving that issue, but that may require modified or costlier approaches or costlier PBO nets, which again brings the issue of do we still use them or do we move directly to dual? Moving directly to dual, however, increases the pressure on chlorfenapyr. Again, that creates the issue of we need a new AI net quite fast, otherwise we're going to start seeing resistance. Country data on net performance, durability, usage patterns, costs, these are all elements that will from this point on have as high as an impact as anything else in what net will be used where. And I open the floor actually for the discussions over the next 2 days of how we're going to do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ioana. So now we will open up for questions. And so what we'll do for questions in the room, we have these mics that we can move around the room. So if there's a question in the room, just please raise your hand. And then I'm just checking the chat just to see if we have any questions in the chat. And there's actually no questions in the Zoom chat online. So there's about 40 people joining online, and they have the ability to put questions in the chat. So there's no questions currently in the Zoom chat. There's a question at the very back. Do you have a microphone? If not, we'll move the microphone to you, and then you can ask your question. So apparently there's 6 microphones in the room. We just have to move those around. So if a few people could grab this. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Sid Rupani from the Global Fund supply chain team. I'm relatively new to the world of nets, so pardon if it's a basic question. But for Ioana, when you say, are nets still the most cost effective? You raise that as a question. What are the alternatives that might be more cost effective, depending on the factors you laid out?
I don't think I have the answer to that as more as the countries have the answer to that. I think there's quite a bit of discussion actually about subnational tailoring and that modeling and looking specifically at the needs, but also the coverage and also the behavior of the people in various parts to decide what is cost effective or not. We have countries or we have regions and districts in countries with very high coverage, very high usage. We also have many areas in other countries where despite high coverage, we have low usage or low durability. And that makes it less cost effective than other things, than other interventions. I think it's up to each NMCP to look at that and decide what is cost effective where. But I don't think it's a universal answer anymore.
Yeah, kind of at that middle table, if you just want to, we'll bring the mic over to you.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais d'abord remercier AFP pour nous avoir invités à cette rencontre. C'est juste des commentaires que je voudrais faire de façon globale sur les urgences que nous avons. Et quand on regarde bien les différentes présentations que nous avons tous intérêt à réfléchir davantage pour voir les meilleures options pour réduire ces coûts. Quand on sait que l'Afrique à elle seule porte 94% de la charge de morbidité paludisme. Et les outils qui permettent de lutter contre le paludisme ne sont pas du tout produits en Afrique. Entre 2004 et 2021, plus de 2 milliards de moustiquaires ont été produits. Pas une seule moustiquaire n'a été produit en Afrique. Je pense que pour aller vers la réduction, il est important, en tout cas pour le plaidoyer, qu'on envisage de délocaliser les industries qui produisent ces moustiquaires pour permettre à l'Afrique de pouvoir accéder facilement à ces moustiquaires. Nous venons de terminer notre élaboration de la subvention pour le Fonds mondial. Imaginez, sur le montant global qui a été alloué au Sénégal, 54% de ce montant va vers l'achat des nouvelles moustiquaires de nouvelle génération. Et ce qui nous a plus ou moins freiné dans la mise en œuvre des autres activités complémentaires qui permettraient au pays d'être efficace. En tout cas, il y a urgence parce que le rapport mondial récent du fonds de l'OMS montre qu'il y a quand même une certaine régression. Le nombre de décès a pratiquement augmenté, le nombre de cas a augmenté et il y a eu des impacts nets de la COVID-19. L'autre question, c'est peut-être les scientifiques et les autres partenaires qui sont là. Pourquoi on n'envisage pas sur la lutte anti-larvaire? Je n'entends jamais parler de la lutte anti-larvaire dans les rencontres. Peut-être c'est le coût élevé, je ne sais pas pourquoi, mais c'est une question que je donne comme ça à l'Assemblée pour peut-être avoir des réponses. Voilà peut-être dans la réflexion, ce qui m'a traversé en tout cas depuis que les présentations se font et vous remercier de votre attention.
Pardon, merci. Alors, je vais prendre la première partie. En ce qui concerne la délocalisation de la production, je sais que c'est un sujet assez intéressant pour tout le monde en ce moment-là. Je sais que les discussions sont assez fortes dans tous les forums politiques, mais aussi même techniques. Je sais que comme nous, comme IVCC, on n'a pas vraiment un désir, on n'a pas une position sur ça. Nous avons seulement regardé du point de vue économique, qu'est-ce que c'est possible ou pas. Et le sujet de, comment je dis ça en français, du prix. Alors, le prix par unité que les Indes ou la Chine arrivent à avoir, ça pose des problèmes quand on discute d'un achat de 6 millions de moustiquaires par an. Si les pays et si le Fonds global et si le PMI ou même au niveau mondial, on décide que oui, c'est vraiment, on va accepter d'avoir un prix plus élevé pour avoir des producteurs locaux, alors l'économie peut alors ça peut marcher. Sinon, si on va avoir toujours comme premier critère le moins cher, je pense que ça va être difficile d'avoir quelqu'un sur place. Comme j'ai dit, c'était notre analyse au niveau global. Mais vous avez raison, on comprend très bien les raisons et on comprend aussi le rationnel. For the second question.
Yeah, thank you for the intervention. I just want to dwell on the comments on advocacy as well as the allocation of the nets in Senegal, just generally to indicate that WHO is quite supportive when it comes to advocating for partnerships to facilitate different aspects of vector control, ITNs inclusive. The leadership in Afro has taken a deliberate effort to establish units to facilitate integration. And these units, there is what we call public precision public health to facilitate the data issues, as well as a unit specifically to streamline policy related issues. And then above to that, just last year, August, a framework on elimination and control, elimination and eradication of tropical and vector-borne diseases was endorsed by member states. The regional committee consisting of all ministers of health from the member states. And that framework is also striving towards streamlining how we implement interventions. So just to shed a little bit more light on the comments that the colleague raised. Thank you.
Good, and we'll take a few questions from participants joining on Zoom. So if you're on Zoom, I can see a few hands are raised. You have to put your questions in the chat. So we have two questions from Drake Zimmerman from Rotarians Against Malaria. The first question is, what actions can we undertake? What interventions such as data systems can we add or take to scale to, number one, speed the decline of malaria, and number two, lower the cost? And then a second question is, malaria is being taken to zero in Asia Pacific countries. What interventions, what insights are we gaining from those focused campaigns? So two questions, kind of two parts to the first question, and second question specific to Asia Pacific. That second question was specific to Asia Pacific, but if we can just, are we bringing any lessons learned from there onto the African continent, for example?
Excuse me.
And we have one, can you introduce yourself as well before your question?
Yeah, my name is Elumba from Sumitomo. Just wanted to make a comment from the question from our friend from Senegal. We do produce mosquito nets in Africa. We have a factory in Tanzania. But I think the answer from Ms. Iona captures the fact that if suppliers are incentivized, I believe they can relocate some of their facilities in Africa. Just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
I would love to have the answer to the first one. What actions can we undertake and what data do we actually need to scale malaria products or scale the malaria interventions and lower costs? I think the answer to that hopefully will be by the end of these 2 days. And I'm hoping that countries will come more with their experience. But if there's something that we've learned through the New Nets project is that the answers come from the countries. So which actions? Obviously, very easy ones that easy, and there's nothing easy about forecasting, for example. So giving certainty on volumes, being clear, being being transparent on where the numbers are coming from and how much countries are willing to procure will help manufacturers have predictability, which ultimately leads to them being able to lower costs because they have predictable volumes that they can then engage in. Specifically in the nets market, this is very difficult because we have these cycles. So in the IRS, it's more linear, but in the nets market, we have cycles based on campaigns, based on distribution years, based on budgets being made available or not. And that does create quite a bit of uncertainty. So when you don't have visibility more than 3 months at a time, it's very difficult to say, I'm going to procure this much plastic to be doing this many nets. So if we are able to be more predictable, which does come from all of us being very clear on what we're procuring, how much we're using, how much is left over, what are our resistance rates, what we should be procuring, what we want to be procuring next year. All of that will help manufacturers massively in being able to have that predictability and lower costs. Also, I always keep saying it to all of our partners countries when we work together, please don't inflate numbers because you're assuming that will get us a better price. If this year those numbers are not met, it does mean that next year they're going to be more expensive. So we all lose. So that's strictly, like I said, looking globally. But it's nothing easy about monitoring resistance. There's nothing easy about linking ENTO to EPI data. And I'm sure that all of that will be discussed these days. And also durability. So, okay, we put this many nets out there. How many do people use? How many do they last? How much do they interact with it? Can we make it better? Those are the types of answers that we should be trying to look at or we're looking at from ours end, but I'm sure countries have a different answer. Thank you.
Good. Maybe we're a little bit behind time, so I'll just take maybe one more question from the room. So over to Team Pakistan, and there's Mike just over there.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Maha from Pakistan. Thank you. Very good presentation. I was just struggling with the word you said, malaria-free word. It was really good. But at the same time, the world is going in such a big crisis, wars, climate change, disaster, humanitarian crisis. So the money is going diverted towards all these things. So what concrete steps we can take that we can reduce the cost, or we can ask the industries to make some franchises in the zone so we can really reach to malaria-free world?
I don't have the answer to that. So first and foremost, not for me, and it's all for you. I'll return it back to you because the ball is in your court. Honestly, the ball is in your court. That's all. I would love to have an answer to that, but.
Okay, look, in the interest of time, we're going to stop here. I wanted to thank Dr. Joseph, Dr. Patrick, Lorian, Dr. Emmanuel, and Ioana for their presentations this morning in the first section. Thank you very much. And we will break now for coffee. We're going to have a slightly shorter coffee break, so we're going to start again at 10:50 sharp in this room. So coffee is just served right outside. Thank you both very much. Sorry about that with the translation. It's good you had some questions. Thank you. I didn't. I was worried I was going to try and stop it, but thank you very much for that.
My name is Giovanni Dusabe. I will be moderating this session, and I'm very happy and pleased to be here today. And it's a privilege for me to moderate this session. I'm particularly happy to meet some old friends I haven't met for maybe over 10 years, like Cedric Minga, Christian Yameni. So it's really a pleasure for me. This session will focus on the deployment of new type of nets in the field, what I've learned in terms of results around efficacy and cost effectiveness, and as well key lessons learned from the campaigns that were involving the deployment of different types of nets. We also see what does the funding landscape look like, and how we can use routing data sources to assess the impact of these new types of net in the field. So I would like to welcome Mr. Andrew Saibu from IVCC, IVCC being the lead for the implementation of the New Nets project, to provide us with key insights from the results of the pilot implementation in different countries. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giovanni. And once again, I'll just follow the earlier protocols that has been already been mentioned, but to express our sincere gratitude once again to Mercy for giving us the opportunity to give some highlights for the New Nets project. So I think basically the New Net project is an initiative that was established by UNITAID and Global Fund with supporting partners such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the US Presidential Malaria Initiative, to be able to assess, to work with other partners or stakeholders to catalyze the market introduction of dual AI ITMs. And I think if you look at describe what was the status before the introduction of the New Net project, some underlying challenges that were looked at in terms of weak evidence, and then there was high barriers to evidence creation. And I think we just heard from Dr. Chandi when he was talking about adapting a new tool which requires it being pre-qualified by WHO. There is also the need to generate data to be able to make decisions on that. And as well as that, Yawana was also talking about how to be able to make things a little easier or cheaper. There's no easy way out. But prior to that, there were only few suppliers of AIDWI nets. And I think the outcome of the project was to ensure that we did a pilot implementation to grow the market and also reduce price. And I think we saw that from Yawanna's presentation, and hopefully have multiple suppliers joining the fray to be able to make it a little bit easier. And again, there was efficacy to generate that data in relation with entomological correlates to help WHO make a policy recommendation on that. So the outputs of the project, and I think you will see that in terms of implementation, we had 4 outputs. One was generating the data to be able to inform policy for WHO to be able to make the PQ process and VCAC to also be assessed. This component of activity was led by the London School of Tropical Medicine. Seem to be having some echo. Right. Was led by London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And in terms of implementation pilots, we had AMP and PSI leading this activity to ensure that pilots and learnings and operational aspects was generated to inform future decisions. Evidence is key. PAF led the evidence generation in the pilot countries to ensure that this data was generated in terms of effectiveness and cost effectiveness, and ensure it was also well disseminated. And at IVCC, as Prime, we're mainly to oversee the general implementation of the project, but more importantly, ensure co-payment and other market intervention layers to ensure that it's not just comes to market, but also look at how those things could be sustainable. This looks a busy slide, but I'm not just going to go through it. I'm just trying to give just a general, overview of the project where there was that, efficacy generated on Interceptor G2 nets, as well as the Royal Guard nets for trials, I said earlier on, that was conducted by London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, as well as PREC. And then the cost effectiveness component, basically generating the operational cost effectiveness data from the pilot countries, and PAF basically that component. The honor again, my colleague just spoke about the market intervention component, where she highlighted the role that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation played to ensure the volume guarantee. And then we had a lot of co-payments within that. Down the line, we see from 2018 to date, what the project has gone, the phases it has gone through, but more importantly, working through the policy to have the policy process evaluation, to generating data, to having the PQB listed. I think one of the key things I want to emphasize here is about the role again in terms of the next transition initiative. That also helped to catalyze the market increase in demand, which is critical about that. I'm trying to look a bit about what the RCT results looked like in Benin. So they did one for the Interceptor G2 net versus standard priority only nets. And they saw some significant reduction in malaria incidence, 46%. There was also a significant reduction in odds of malaria infection prevalence, 52% at 6 months and 39% at 18 months. And in terms of entomological and inoculant recreation, they also saw a significant reduction in malaria transmission, both indoor and outdoor for the Interceptor G2 nets. And that for the Royal Guard, also looking at it versus the standard only net, no significant protection for malaria incidence and prevalence was seen. And also they talk about significant reduction in malaria transmission was for only indoor, and then there were issues of physical and bioefficacy until up to 2 years. They also reported lower usage of the nets. Now, this graph basically just talks about the results having similar in terms of what was done in Benin and what was done in Tanzania. One useful thing to look at is the Benin results we know, as most of us will know, was published in the Lancet earlier this year. And we are one of the key milestones that is very important to mention is the fact that both nets received policy recommendation again in the first quarter of 2023. Some highlights of some of the recommendations that I have made, because I know program managers are talking about integration and looking for policy direction. There was strong recommendation for the deployment of pyrethroid conjunctival ITNS versus pyrethroid only nets, and a conditional recommendation for the deployment of pyrethroid conjunctival ITNS instead of only PBO nets. And I think there was another conditional recommendation for the deployment of pyrethroid pyroprocessing nets instead of only pyrethroid nets. In terms of key learnings, that's output 2, which PSI together with AMP did a very good job providing some lessons, because I remember during the break, some countries were talking about challenges that it comes with multiple product implementation. Not to belabor the point, already spoke about the amount of nets that are coming to the market, packaging, particularly individual nets, links to waste generation. Ability to manage the waste is still something. The options are limited, and I'm happy that Jessica is here. She's doing something great that we'll likely be learning from. And again, it's an opportunity for countries to learn to see how are others doing it, what best practices are there for us to learn from. And I think it's something that we'll personally be looking at. In terms of synchronization of IT and arrival for multiple products, under the NMEP also was a problem because this is likely to continue beyond the new NET project. And it's important that as countries to be able to have alternative plans, not just for contingency, but also look at the budget implication that goes along with that. Again, not to belabor the point, we spoke about the supply chain challenges. COVID was there and COVID compounded the problems. The good news is that within that same period, AMP did an excellent job in providing guidance, documents for countries to be able to use if you were used from micro planning to implementation to multi-product. It's important. I think most of these guidelines, not to go through them, but are on the AMP website, and then we can all have access to that. In terms of output 3, I've seen Molly here. The PAF team, they led that. Another excellent job that was done in terms of what did they find. In terms of, in Burkina Faso, percentage reduction in case incidents. If you look at on the graphs there, the overall net effect, they saw a 19% greater reduction associated with IG2 and a 25% reduction associated with PB units. And in terms of cases averted, it is estimated that 3,400 per cases averted per 10,000 residents in areas where the IG2 nets were distributed, and 4,400 cases averted per, again, 10,000 residents by distributing PBO instead of standard ITNs. There was a similar observation that was made in Rwanda, where we saw a 56% reduction associated with IG2 and 71% greater reduction associated with standard NES plus IRS. I think we know probably what IRS does, and the data is also there to show. We refer to this. And in terms of cases averted for Rwanda, saw 2,000 cases per 10,000 residents that were averted by within the IG2 distribution areas, compared to, again, 5,700 per 10,000 residents. And it's important to state that this was done looking at districts' rainfall pattern as well as the socioeconomic status of these areas that was research was done. In Western Mozambique, there was a 56% reduction associated again with IG2 nets in the Guru area, while 5.2 reduction associated with PBU nets was not statistically significant. And if you look at that again, we're talking about in terms of cases averted, the study saw close to 7,000 per cases averted for every 10,000 residents. And Northern Mozambique saw a 35% greater reduction associated again with the areas where IG2 was distributed. And in terms of cases averted, 3,200 for every 10,000 residents. And then if you look at that again, where you compare it to a 3,000 per 10,000 residents by Royal Guard nets instead of fully standard nets. Looking at Nigeria, it's important to state that incidence data in Nigeria is confounded by so many factors in terms of whether migration or suboptimal reporting, inconsistent data used from public health sector. And we know, those of us from this part of the world, this is not new in terms of our public health system. And this is not peculiar to only Nigeria. And where a greater reduction was seen was in the Asa and Moro district, where IG2 and the Royal Guards were distributed respectively. But it's important to state that prior to that study, those areas where there's greater reduction had already seen 4 rounds of SMC being done to the one study. So that could account for some of this. What are some of the key takeaways from the results that we've seen? Mass distribution of ITN strongly is associated with increase in ITN use, and definitely also leads to decrease in malaria transmission, regardless of the type of nets that are used. In sub-Saharan Africa, where parotid vectors are resistant, it's important that distributing IG2, PBO nets, Royal Guards seem to be more effective in controlling malaria distribution than just the standard nets or parotid only nets. And also saw that the key message is that IG2 distribution appears to last longer beyond 12 months. In terms of durability, we have mentioned again, where I think Dr. Chandy also made reference to that. There are challenges associated with that. Bottom line, the results that were generated from the study is in line with same results that were found in the RCT from Tanzania and Benin. I don't intend to take much about this because Yawana presented half of this slide. And if I intend to talk about it, she manages our figures and everything. I'm sure I'll mess it up. So I'll just leave it at what she spoke about. But what is important is that Newness project has brought to a stage that procurement of nets or budgets are within the country budgets that they can procure. We had an estimated volume of 35 billion nets to reach. Good news is that working strongly with the partner coordination, we're able to reach this a year ahead of schedule. And one critical point to talk here is that if the initial uptake of dual AI nets required an additional support of almost 1:1 ratio, by beyond 2021, the new net countries are taking close to over 80% of the cost of nets, with a full inclusion of the price in current programmatic budgets from 2022. And I think that the good news is in terms of wrapping up capacity, we are aware that BASF had the capacity to look at an estimated of 50 million nets per year. Again, Vestergaard has just come in, which is also good news. We're sure that when we begin to get the figures from them, that would go up to support or reduce the challenges that are associated with short-term forecasts. And again, it's important that as more products are being PQ listed within the dual active ingredients sphere, it's good for market competition. So we hope to see that in the near future. As we wrap up the Newness project, what are we doing and some future questions that need to be considered? We know we are still continuing with engaging with stakeholders, with manufacturers to track on production planning for dual AI nets. There's a need to publicize the data that have been generated, particularly on the cost effectiveness pilots and cost effectiveness results, which is critical. I think one of the key things we had to do is what is happening now, share the results to countries during this fine opportunity this week, and a symposium planned in Addis, I think it's in September for PAMCA. So there's going to be a symposium as well. Again, there's that continuation, Benin third year analysis is still ongoing, that hopefully once it's available, once it's completed, sure, we'll find an avenue to share that as well. Having said all this, there are some key questions that needs to be addressed, and it's for all of us to be thinking, if we want to do this, how do we do that? And where do we get the budget to do that? Effectiveness and cost effectiveness of combining this new type of nets and long-lasting IRS, what would that look like? Will there be a need to make a comparison between just the dual nets versus long-lasting IRS nets? There's a need to continue to monitor the resistance in terms of chlorpheniramine. It's a new molecule. It's important that we keep tracking to ensure that we do not lose it immediately. Another question that looks like, why do we see reduced efficacy of IG2 nets in some heart trials, although they still perform better than other nets? These are some of the questions that we've had based on what we've gone through the project, and I think that this is something that we can all look at. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Andrew. Let's give him another round of applause for his good presentation. It's clear from his presentation, the results from the pilot, that the new types of nets have proven effective, at least compared to the standard in terms of overcoming the insecticide resistance. And you have seen impact in terms of malaria incidence cases reducing. So at this point, I'd like to ask the audience, for those who have questions, to just raise your hands and to have the mic, introduce yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Since people are being quiet, I'll hold the mic. I guess Andrew and I'm wondering a little bit about the pyriproxyfen nets. I mean, we continue to talk about really the chlorphenapyr net as a viable and scalable product, but we hear much less about the pyriproxyfen net. So I wondered if you could speak to that a bit. I know that WHO has put out some guidance on how to prioritize your nets and which ones are going where. So I just wondered if you wanted to touch on that a bit, Andrew, because I know that a lot of people are really focused on the IG2 and we hear much less about the pyriproxyfen. So I wondered if you could say a few words on that. Thanks.
Hello? Yes, so my question is on the monitoring between the dual AL net and that of the long-lasting net. So I really want to know, when will that be and which country are you going to do the monitoring in?
Thank you. This is for Andrew. In your presentation of the findings in Nigeria, you made references to issues about data quality. I wanted you to elaborate a bit about this and to find out if this was not anticipated in the planning for the pilot. Thank you.
Andrew, over to you.
Thanks, Mercy. I think Mercy's referring to a lot being spoken about in terms of interceptor G2, with less talk about Royal Guard. I think, again, if you saw my presentation, there's a place where WHO has also recommended where it can be used. I think for me, what is important is countries to look at that reference and see what data do you have in country. Based on the data you have, you certainly will have a place where you can deploy Royal Guard nets. And again, to also talk about that, we definitely, again, and I mentioned as part of the way forward, in terms of that, the fact that we continue to engage those partners, to work with them, to also reach out to countries to disseminate this information that they have, to help them know that it is not that there are some places that it definitely can work. So that's something that's being done. And I know some countries are making plans to procure that. There was one on monitoring, which I think is one of the questions that opened up about monitoring the durability of IG2 nets or new nets vis-a-vis IRS. The project didn't cover that. So it's a question we have posed to see if in future that area can be looked at to do that comparison. Then there was a question on data quality on Nigeria. I didn't get your question. Well, I knew it was about data quality, but if you can repeat the question for me.
Sorry, Patrick, I was trying to confirm, because in your presentation, you said the quality of data did not probably enable you to take informed decisions about the project in, I think, Kwara State or so. So I wanted you to elaborate a bit and to find out if these were not anticipated in the planning process for the pilot. Thank you.
I think there's still some work that is ongoing in Nigeria, right? So as of the time that we reported, these are the issues that came from it. But I'm very happy that Molly is here, who led the evidence with it. So she would play a cardinal role in supporting me to provide some insight.
Yeah, so I was working on the NMP project, and the Nigeria team is also welcome to respond to this. But yes, data quality was challenges with data quality was anticipated, and just to say, we're going to have a talk a little bit later going over all of the methodological aspects of NewNets. But one important aspect that we thought was critical in Nigeria was to look at prevalence in ANC as a way to understand kind of the periodicity of prevalence at a granular level that we might not be able to see because of the data quality issues and incidents. We still looked at incidents because that is a critical that's a critical measure for cost effectiveness, but we understood that there might be data quality issues, and we accounted for that in the other measurements that were included in the NewNets project. Thank you.
Any other question in the room? Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Parambir Gill from the Global Fund. I was hearing about data quality, so I just wanted to kind of focus on that. Like, when we talk of data quality, what exact measures were there? Can we get a little more insight into both data quality, data availability, data completeness? And, if you could touch on those, because, was there any effort made post factum to assess was there any data available, let's say, live, and then what data was available post the activity? Thank you.
Again, I think just to infer from what Molly said, I'll suggest we leave this question to that session where Molly was talking about, because this would definitely be addressed during that time.
There is another question from remote participants. Question for Andrew is from Corinne Gufo. Thanks for the great presentation. It was great to see that the WHO guidelines touched on pre-authorized PPF nets. What are the projections for country demands for pre-authorized PPF nets? Pre-authorized PPF nets may contribute to resistance management. What are the projections for country demands for pre-authorized PPF nets?
Projections, I think I'll refer that to Your Honor. Projections for
Do you want this projection by class, or do you want the projections by, we've just had a slide.
It was an online question, so maybe you can speak about global projections.
Well, the sub-Saharan Africa that we've just presented, and globally you can add another 20 million on top of that annually. But the issue comes down to what I said. We don't have visibility. We don't know where we're going. We're roughly having some numbers globally, but locally we don't have those numbers, and that makes the challenge. And it comes down to the quality of the data. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you so much. Let's again clap for Andrew for his presentation before we go to the next presenter. The next presentation, I would like to welcome the youngest person in this room today, Dr. Jimmy Opigo, to present about successes and challenges with two multi-product campaigns and future planning based on your evaluation.
Thank you and good morning. And thank you for the warm birthday wishes. I would like to propose a switch. Medad Rukare seated just next to Patrick there, is the man with the boots on the ground. I really provide leadership. I've come with him a number of times to this meeting, so it's unfair for me to steal the show. I would like him to speak. He's going to specifically try to narrow down what was discussed before. You saw earlier, we saw how this functions. We have academic institutions generating evidence. We have implementing partners. We have the funders. And we are challenged by how to decide which ones exactly to roll out. You need some evidence since they are costly, but also in implementation, how do you handle the logistics? How do you handle the waste? How do you handle the relationship with stakeholders, beneficiaries, and politicians, explaining to them why they should receive A and not B? How is that exactly done? And how do we leverage this also to generate evidence? Because as most of you are aware, in Uganda, the last 2 mass campaigns, we used it as really implementation efficacy hybrid studies for large-scale deployment evaluation. Medad, over to you. And then I will remain to take the questions when they eventually come.
Greetings from Uganda. I don't know what is happening to my presentation. Yeah, it is very clear from here. I did an ITS specialist. Is part of the presentation. So as she sets the IT component, I just wanted to highlight a few things as part of the introduction. Is that when we got an invite specifically to highlight successes and challenges regarding the mass campaign for the MART product, we asked ourselves that before you get to success, you need to understand the opportunities. You need to first understand the opportunities. So as Uganda, what are opportunities available to make us do multi-product distribution? Number one is that we do have a strong government partnership that promotes innovations and accommodate several stakeholders, especially to scale up intervention for impact. It was a very good platform for us as a program to benchmark the benefits of the government as part of the opportunities to do the multi-product distribution. The second one is the existing structures that as Uganda, we have excellent structures, both by logistics, is currently headed by Pamela, who is trying to support the IT people to make sure that all of these commodities, they are well placed in WAMBO procurement system. They are well monitored through the pipeline. They also move up to the household level so there is no contamination. Then another opportunity that contributes to the success before the challenges is availability of funding. Is the Global Fund willing to fund the MART product? The answer is yes. It gives us a very good platform and negotiation powers. What about Against Malaria Foundation? Support the brand of MART product. It is also a very good platform. What about other stakeholders? All of these are good opportunities as the country that we enjoy to do a unique multi-product distribution. The last one, not least, is the existing capacity. Even when we are distributing the standard nets, but we had different types. When we have moved by classes, we have also found the capacity existing. So we have not lost the capacity as a country, as stakeholders, and also as implementers. So those are some of the key arms that inform the successes of this multi-product distribution mechanism. I don't know what is happening. So to the presentation, coming to the presentation, I don't know what has happened. 1 minute. So what I'm trying still to emphasize as I conclude possibly in case the presentation is not coming through, is that the part of the programming for multi-product as a country, we do focus on 4 areas. We normally focus on financing. Do you have enough money? Do you have enough money to procure all the highlighted products despite different costs variation between the PBO, between the standard and the new generation? The answer is yes, if you are to achieve universal coverage. Then 2, what justifies to deploy the multiple products? The disease burden by malaria prevalence. Do you have data? The answer is yes. If you don't have data, you cannot justify the global context and acceptance. Then 3, you remember Uganda hosts refugees. So we normally have some disasters, those influx of refugees. Then we also have some malaria upsurges. We also consider them as part of the procurement. In the mapping, possibly when it comes, you will see that most of the affected districts, they are heavily in the borders and those import having refugee settlements. So those are some of the factors that also contribute in the design and securing funding for the multi-product. So in the monitoring of these interventions or these products across the board, we monitor from the procurement stage, where we monitor the pipeline, we monitor the manufacturers. So I was emphasizing that as a program, we are monitoring them from before distribution, especially at a procurement level, macro level. When we place orders, we monitor them when they come in a country. For example, when we place orders, we monitor them by type, how they are coming in, packaging as part of specifications for procurement. Then we link them with the central warehouse, where we put them in different warehousing, because our distribution mechanism gives a room for studies. So we are avoiding compromising the study integrity. We also monitor them during distribution by where you had mapped at a micro planning level. Are you dispatching the right product? Or there is a need to have a parallel reporting system? What about the transportation plan? All of these things are factored in as part of emphasizing the need to plan and implement according to the standard that have been approved by all of the donors. Then there is the part of the post-distribution program. We also have several parameters we use to make sure that our products, the way we quantified, the way we transported, the way we allocated, have reached these households and do exist. For example, if we have provided standard nets in such an area and we are doing the post-distribution monitoring, are they the same nets the same product that you delivered, we have them also by the brand, where we do durability study and household monitoring. Specifically for this net campaign, we intend to do the hang up, especially for the new generation under IG2. Then still under micro planning, we assess the different products where they are supposed to be delivered by looking at the suitability of the stores, because some of the products come when they are individually packaged, others come when they are not individually packaged, in terms they are just in wrappings to make a full bear. We link all of those mechanisms as part of the implementation arrangement. For example, where we have multiple individual packaging, because we are aware that Interceptor G2 does individual packaging, and part of the management plan, especially for the waste management, we are linking all of those wastes, the incinerators or health facility waste management plan. Then we talked about the studies as part of the opportunities. As Uganda, we have several studies conducted during NET campaign. What we normally emphasize is that we make studies fit into the campaign, not campaign fit into the studies. So we benchmark the campaign design, then the design of the campaign inform the study protocols. So for the transportation, we use the standard mechanisms, but we link the transportation arrangement with the different warehouses, So if we need one area, okay. So Major, I will just summarize because I had talked through most of the slides. Yeah. What I was emphasizing here is that we have several partners interested in the multi-product support based on the opportunities we have at the country. So you can see the Against Maya Foundation is covering more than 40% of the country. Then the Global Fund funds the rest of the country. They fund based on our country design and plan, not necessarily their own initiative. Then two, we link these different products to the insecticide resistance mapping. You will appreciate, for example, the new generation. They are more in the borders. I think for us as an academicians and programmers, we need to challenge ourselves that why are we having, for example, where we are putting new generations, we have had confirmed PBO resistance. Why are we having PBO resistance in the borders? It is a question for all of us. According to the insecticide resistance mapping in Uganda, we have had reported PBO resistance. And we have also used some ecological zones to make sure that we have a very good coverage. So this is what I had talked about, that this informs on how we should fund these different products by the malaria burden, by disaster or malaria upsurges to have maximum impact, funding stream by different donors. Remember, we used to have big funding from the DFID, but now we are getting it through another arm. Then what about the longevity of these nets in the household? So I had talked about all of these processes being involved, that we do a continuous monitoring of these products. It's a non-stop mechanism to make sure that what we had planned has been implemented and it has given us the intended benefits. So as part of the emphasis, I talked about the production. We work closely with different donors to see what we have asked in the production selection of the commodity. Is it according to the resistance profile of the country? Is it existing indoor use spraying in the geographical area, or the SMCs. But what is very important for us, specifically for IRS, there is guidance that where we are currently conducting IRS, we don't deploy the new generation. So we can continue the study. I think even the question had come on the table to us. Then for quantification, there are very many factors we consider, but in summary, we use the census data of the population. We also consider, as a country, we are very unique in nature. We also consider refugees. It is very hectic to implement in the refugees unless you have been there before. We work closely with UNHCR and their implementing partners to smoothen and link the two implementation arrangements. The population in those settlements are very difficult to determine because they change every day. For example, if I plan last year with 1.5, by next year you might even have 1.9. They affect our quantification mechanism. Then we also make a waiving plan. We just cluster a few districts that are closer to each other to ease coordination, delivery of services. The same districts must be having some similar characteristics, So this is what I had talked about for the research, because we normally have malaria sentinel sites, to make sure the intervention that we do deploy, they are heavily monitored scientifically, and the findings can be presented for acceptance, This is what I had emphasized. For example, this is a different product, and these are different products. We do comprehensive storage mapping based on their guidance. You can see for 2020, where different products are deployed. We don't mess it up. We do a very good transportation plan. We do very good locations, and we prepare teams at these different levels, because the study must fit within the campaign. So in all of this process, for us to have a respected structure, we do comprehensive tracking. We track all of these commodities from the manufacturing up to the household level. So we use different tools to make sure that these nets get the household and monitor their performances. So, for example, you can see when you are doing a post-distribution monitoring, you will find these nets are found where they have been delivered, and these ones are also where they have been pressed. There is no contamination or mixed distribution beyond the design. This is also an evidence that in the follow-up, you will find where you have located the MF nets and where you have located the global fund nets, exactly where they are being utilized. And we use all of these mechanisms to maximize the programming. So what are the key successes as I conclude? I talked about the opportunities, but I wanted to bring you to attention that the existing of data for insecticide resistance mapping as a country has given us a good foundation to succeed in both procurement and deployment. You must justify to different stakeholders why you are distributing different net types to different regions or areas. Because remember, you will say, why are you not also giving me PBO? Why are you not giving me the new generation? Why are you giving me standard? It is the data that provides us to move as success. Then two, it gives us an opportunity to bring on board very many stakeholders. The multi-product distribution campaign has brought up very many malaria stakeholders, and we are using them as advocates for more malaria funding. For example, in this campaign, we didn't know about the subsidized IG2. It is out of this interaction where we got an opportunity and we succeeded in this procurement. Then three, it also provided as a platform for us as part of the innovation for every new tool. When we deploy them and they perform better, it gives us more running, more opportunities to keep on improving to maximize the benefits. Then for the discovery of a new tools, because they keep challenging. Today, if we have deployed PBO permanent 3.0. Tomorrow you deploy so ORSET plus, you look at the benefit of the two. So there is that also benefit. Then we achieve maximum research collaborations. You see IDRC, you see School of Public Health, there are very many partners interested in such a distribution mechanism. So there are some challenges. There are some challenges that we face. There are some challenges. One is that the activity is multitasking. It is multitasking. You are coordinating very many players. You are coordinating very many players, and having many players on board, the interests are completely different. But we try to manage. We try to manage. It is resource intensive, both human, because remember you are monitoring even the product, you need to put in the place. People have studied well logistics. In terms of also money, the standard nets costs are different from the PBO, from the new generation. All of these things are part of the challenges, but we overcome because of the existing opportunities. Then I talked about the waste management plan. You must align the distribution with your waste management plan because some of the nets come when they are individually packaged. For example, because of different net and products, we normally have a hybrid communication plan. We have one uniform communication for the distributions, but when it comes to specific areas, different products, you have a tailored messages because of the benefit you want to maximize. Then it can be a source of conflicts. I can tell you it is not easy. Why have you selected this? Why not this? You provide data, has been approved by WHO. What's the degree of the integrity of the data? It can also be a source of conflict if it is not well managed. Because it also referred, has it been approved by WHO? Is it preliminary? All of these questions come on a table during the planning. Then the procurement regulations come in. Said, how are you regulating it? This chemical has not been tested locally. What about the percentages? All of these things come in place as part of the lessons learned. There are some gaps in the quality assurance and the quality control. Remember, innovation is moving ahead of the quality control farmers. For example, you have a new generation nets. The testing procedures are not in place. So you must convince them to approve them to come to the country. Then risk of research contamination from the routine net distribution. Remember that they use those controls, but in the long run, you find some nets when you are doing mapping for the routine distribution. You are procured interceptor G2 for the mass campaign. When you are doing continuous distribution, you are distributing standard nets. So we also have that risk. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking wrong.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Meda. The beauty of having people who are well-versed in the implementation of activities and operations, they don't over-rely on PowerPoint presentation. They can talk from the experience. So thank you for that. So the next presentation is from Mozambique to talk about the experience. Dr. Candrinho from NMCP Mozambique won't be able to join us physically, but we have a pre-recorded PowerPoint presentation from him, but will be also available online to respond to the questions. So Orion, if you can play the presentation from Mozambique.
I will start my presentation to share with you our approach to feeding, stratification, and subnational tailoring within our strategic planning process. I will start my presentation to share with you our approach to feeding, stratification, and subnational tailoring within our strategic planning process. I'll start my presentation to share with you our approach to feeding, stratification, and subnational tailoring within our strategic planning process. I'll start my presentation to share with you our approach to feeding, stratification, and subnational tailoring within our strategic planning process. Given the resource constraints and the heterogeneity of transmission intensity, intervention can be targeted to maximize the impact. NMCPs must consider a number of factors when deciding which intervention to place and where to place them. For example, actually, Mozambique, we are in process to develop the GC7 global. Giving
Can you put up Lydia's presentation, please? Yes.
Which one is this? Hello, can you hear me? All right. So we're going to be talking first of all, thanks everyone for your flexibility and patience. I think we all know it's really important to be adaptive and resilient and flexible. So I think based on all of our experiences, we can appreciate how we also have opportunities to continue to move forward. So that said, my colleague Patrick and I will be presenting on behalf of, oh, there you are, perspectives from PMI, the US President's Malaria Initiative, and Global Fund. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Lilia Gerberg. I'm based in the US with the Vector Monitoring and Control team, and I work closely with PMI's supply chain team. So my colleague Chris Warren is here as well, representing the supply chain team. So I actually think a number of our points echo some of the comments and observations and experiences communicated thus far by the program from Uganda, as well as IVCC and WHO and other partners. But I think really, and all of us can understand that what we're seeing now is that there are a number of threats, including insecticide resistance, as well as the emergence of new invasive species, namely Anopheles stevensii, that are endangering our ability to sustain the progress to date. And WHO presented on how much we've achieved so far, but how much we need to make sure that we adapt and innovate in order to sustain that progress. That said, we're in an environment where resources are limited. And so there are gaps in essential malaria intervention for prevention, as well as beyond, looking beyond vector control to the entire malaria portfolio. Also within that context, I think we also appreciate we have the data that have been generated with a new NETS project and other partners to justify and really have the data that justify decisions with Global Fund and PMI prioritize the scale up of dual active ingredient nets. That said, as we all know, and we have manufacturers here as well, which is appreciated, that there's funding barriers as well as product pricing and supply manufacturing capacity that continue to remain barriers. And therefore, I really appreciate, all partners that we have represented in this room and beyond, donors, countries, researchers, that we all must work cohesively and strategically together to ensure that these products, these global public goods, are accessible in an equitable manner. We had some information about forecasting, looking 10 years out. I think I'm just going to focus on 2022 for a minute, and just really underscore that both the Global Fund and PMI procure the 3 types of nets that we all are familiar with: the standard pyrethroid only, the pyrethroid PBO nets, and the dual active ingredient nets. I think there was a comment about pyriproxyfen nets, and just one slight difference between PMI and Global Fund funded nets is that at this time, Global Fund funds both dual AIs for chlorphenapyr as well as pyriproxyfen nets, but at this time, PMI funding can only be used to procure chlorphenapyr nets. And we'll speak to the next slide on the WHO recommendations. But just to give an order of magnitude, I think this bar graph here, it's hard to see, but illustrates between 2018 and 2022, the different nets that were procured by different funders, including the Global Fund. I'm not seeing on this the colors, but Global Fund in yellow, PMI in green, UNICEF orange, AMF in blue, and then other donors in purple. And I know AMF's not here in person, but really appreciating their increased contribution, especially for new types of nets, PBOs, and their investments in Uganda in the upcoming campaign. And so in 2022, we can see that Global Fund procured approximately 119 million nets, about 13% of which were dual AIs, and PMI procured about 30 million nets, about 7% of which were dual AIs. And I think we had earlier from WHO presentations of global pictures as well, and the increased proportion of PBO and dual AI nets over time. I won't go too much into this, but I think one thing, PMI and Global Fund are similar in a lot of ways. These 2 links are to the relative costs of the different products. There are slight variations in terms of the dollar amounts that Global Fund is able to negotiate versus PMI. But I think just to note, prices vary both on the type of net as well as size. I think as many of you are aware, Global Fund is expecting some new pricing to come through after the completion of the ongoing ITN tenders. And Patrick can correct me, but in the current Global Fund application round, Global Fund is advising that countries use the current PBO pricing as an approximation for dual AI nets, whereas PMI in our price advice for countries planning for their fiscal year 2024 malaria operational planning, on average, the dual AI net is coming in at about 30 cents more than the dual AI chlorphenapyr nets. But then I think the other point is, I think, really important for programs to note, not just in terms of price implications, but lead times, especially planning for campaigns, as well as to ensure uninterrupted supply of continuous distribution. We're seeing, the dual AI nets do have a longer lead time, and the PMI procured nets are coming in a few weeks longer in general than the Global Fund procured ones. Okay, I think many of us are aware, WHO issued its policy recommendation in March on dual AI nets. And I think most of you, WHO presented and can look in the details online. But the bottom takeaway messages, which were emphasized previously, or in general, countries based on the data should prioritize chlorphenapyr nets in areas of pyrethroid resistance. I think there's also discussion in terms of or PBO nets for various reasons. As mentioned before, I think in terms of pyriproxyfen, countries can consider those nets under various circumstances. Again, though, that would be with Global Fund funding only, and I think there's different considerations there as well. The WHO recommendation was less strong for the pyriproxyfen nets than the chlorphenapyr. I think there's also discussion, countries, those few countries that thus to date do not have data on pyrethroid resistance could continue to order those pyrethroid nets, although consideration of whether they might want to shift to newer nets as an insecticide resistance management strategy is a consideration, but as always, there's funding constraints. And I think, as we know, there's a new pre-qualified pyrethroid chlorphenapyr net manufacturer, which we welcome in terms of expanding the supplier base. And hopefully increasing stability and supply capacity for those dual AI chlorphenapyr products. And we're hoping that these market dynamics may over time lead to some price decreases. And now I will turn it over to Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilia, and grateful that I don't have the problem of MEDAD. Because as you can see, those are challenges at country level, but we also have global challenges, especially in how do we respond to the new WHO guidance on the different types of nets. The first thing is we believe the recommendation is going to turn into a higher demand for the new nets. However, I think as somebody already touched earlier on today, IVCC, there is a need to continue to look for new products, especially as we envisage resistance will quickly come in. However, malaria budgets have flatlined, as all of you are much familiar with the allocation this year. And this is going to be a challenge, especially as we know the newer nets are a little bit still expensive. So some of the things affecting price has to do with the market dynamics, like the cost of crude oil, labor costs, and what happened in the NUNETS project was a co-payment which allowed us to rapidly reduce the price from 4.5 to now just over $3. And also from COVID era, we know that the costs such as freight and raw material prices have continued to threaten the new nets, and inflation in countries is one of the major issues. And of course, the lack of original manufacturing further makes this a huge challenge. So I think for the private sector people in the room, this is something I think you should be looking at. How do we diversify production? Currently, we have just finished the first set of countries that apply to Global Fund for this new cycle of funding. And some of the considerations that the countries took into consideration as they're developing the grants were availability of data on pyrethroid resistance. And this is something that countries should use to determine how to prioritize. Through the work of MP, they developed a document which WHO has adopted now in terms of what countries should follow to prioritize deployment of different types of nets. And the first one is we should prioritize deployment of the chlorphenapyr nets in areas previously deployed. And secondly, continue to prioritize deployment of either PBO nets or chlorphenapyr nets in areas previously receiving PBO nets. And then depending on budget, we start to expand from that point of status. And we hope that either you're able to find efficiencies in your budgets and therefore be able to procure more dual AI nets or PBO nets. However, we encourage you in your funding requests to identify the price differential and put this in the above allocation so that once funding becomes available, we will be able to procure more effective nets. Of course, we have to pay attention to the durability issues which many countries are reporting, both in terms of the physical durability and chemical durability, which will influence how we plan our future campaigns. And also, there are countries that are proposing transitioning away from IRS due to many challenges, particularly on funding for regular IRS. And the challenge we put them is a robust exit strategy so that we avoid upsurges of malaria. So what are the potential scenarios that we see? I think the most likely scenario is that the current deployment approaches will remain, in the sense that where we have currently deployed either PBO nets or chlorphenapia nets, the recommendation is to continue to make sure we don't pull away back from those areas. The unlikely scenario is a complete switch to the dual AI nets because of funding. However, it's very unlikely that we'll scale back from where the numbers today we saw where we are, because both PMI and the Global Fund, based on WHO guidance, are really ensuring that countries do not withdraw the more effective nets from those areas where already they've been deployed. And of course, we will continue to look at and support countries to study issues of durability within their own country contexts. This is the last slide, and just to summarize that we're pleased to be here, both Global Fund and PMI, and do agree on the importance of continuing to provide protection to, particularly first and foremost, those populations at the highest burden of malaria. We should never leave them unprotected. We continue to emphasize the importance of entomological monitoring, and glad that Uganda's experience, despite the issues, really pointed this out, because it helps make your case for why you're deploying what where. And we continue to encourage, and in the next few minutes, we'll have a colleague come and talk about subnational tailoring. And I know that many of you in your countries have been working very hard with different partners on ensuring we look at our own data to ensure where is it appropriate to deploy different interventions. So we hope that all of us together, all the stakeholders, funders, country programs, private sector, will continue to prioritize the best and optimal vector control in our countries. I think I'll leave it here, and happy to answer any questions together with my colleague Lydia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lydia and Patrick, for taking us through the funding context and different challenges and scenarios. We're going to try again to see if Dr. Kandunyo's presentation. If we can't, then we take questions from the audience for the.
Allow me.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Allow me to say thank you for giving the Mozambique the opportunity to present in this very important technical meeting. I will share with you on the next couple of minutes the experience in Mozambique in decision-making and trade-off for deployment of new ITN types aligned to resistance data. I will start my presentation to share with you our approach to feeding, stratification, and subnational tailoring within our strategic planning process. Given the resource constraints and the heterogeneity of transmission intensity, intervention can be targeted to maximize the impact. NMCPs must consider a number of factors when deciding which intervention to place and where to place them. For example, actually, Mozambique, we are in process to develop the GC7 Global Funding request, and we are facing with a challenge with finding financial resources. To prioritize this, we use four factors. The first one is funding available versus cost of intervention. We need to see what is the envelope that we have versus the cost for each intervention. The second one is a spatial and temporal distribution for malaria burden. The third one is to look for the impact of different factors on effectiveness of intervention. The last one is operational feasibility of implementing intervention. In Mozambique, we launched on last week the new malaria strategic plan 2023-2030. But this new strategic plan was developed based on the analysis for the old one, the previous one, where we did the midterm review and end-term review. Starting with the midterm review conducted in 2020, we started with the retrospective data review and the collation of research. We did the mathematical modeling and updating the financial modeling. After collecting all this information, we did a midterm review group discussion where the technical workings group sit and see all these data and made some deliberations. And following this process, we did the strategic retreats with external reviewer to analyze all this data, and then MCP and small groups sitting and refine and develop the final reports. To approach the decision make to trade off for LLINs, in Mozambique, we take in account two principles. One principle is a dollar is a dollar, dollar is a dollar. So what I want to mean with this is we don't only consider LLINs when optimizing our budget. We work to optimizing across the full spectrum of intervention. How we do that? One is to develop one strategic plan that all partners and the donors can work to support it. Second is to prioritize that strategic plan in a way to maximize the cost effectiveness of implementing, in a way to focus to build the sustainable and strong health system. So you can see in this slide, if I see LLINs particularly, there is $1 for LLINs. It's the same, that's $1 for RDTs and $1 for drugs and $1 for the implementation. So it's all this intervention we can see at the same spectrum for implementation. The second principle is to maximize the reduction of malaria with available resources. In this principle, we say that we want to avoid the one-size-fits-all approach. In order, we want just to see, based on this data analysis, to see what is the mix of intervention that we can obtain the great reduction of malaria. I will move to the methods and the results from 2020. In 2020, as I said, we conduct this midterm review at the strategic plan midterm review, and based on all this data review and data analysis, we built these two risk maps to see where is the burden of malaria. If you see these maps for Mozambique, there is in all countries at the risk of malaria, but of course there is a difference, differences in between the province and also between the districts on the coast and the center and the northern province. So the burden is quite high. And we did this we see different interventions to see the effectiveness of different interventions. I will give you, for example, the IRS. IRS, we see the burden, and okay, IRS will deploy the IRS where the burden is high. We see the seasonality. So what is the province or districts that have high seasonality is more eligible for IRS. And we see the insecticide resistance. This information will take us to think about for the selection of the better insecticide. And also we can see, for example, the vector species distribution, and we know that IRS is better where the species is for Anopheles funestus. So if we see this data, this malaria risk, this intervention, specific intervention, the effectiveness of this, and we add the operational consideration, for example, what is the capacity at provincial level? What is the capacity at district level? What is the geographic adjustment? And add with the predicted modeling to see the impact of transmission. And the modeling can say, okay, if we mix 1, 2, 3, or 3, the impact is A. If we mix 2, or 4, the impact is B. Something like that. For airlines in particular, so we use the two important data that we had from 2019. One is to see we confirmed the pteroid resistance, at least in one species in every district. And second, so we confirmed the monooxygenase resistance mechanism to make our decision. According all this, our response was to see this data with supporting with the New Nets project and the Global Fund and UNICEF. We reallocated and targeted the deployment of PBO and dual alliance nets. You can see on the left, the two provinces in green. It's we deployed the dual alliance, and two provinces in blue, so we implemented the PBO nets. You can see on the rest the standard nets with some IRS, and in south of Mozambique and Maputo province in particular, you see we deploy just IRS. The results was quite good, and we did the application, the Global Fund application, the NFM3, and we're saving 26.3 million. That allow us to moving to more PBO and the dual ITNs in all target areas. What we did is to have PBO nets for all provinces except two provinces that we did the dual alliance, and the modeling shows that we can reach 8 or 14% of a decrease in burden compared with the place where we note the counterfall, we use the different approach. What happened in the real life? In the real life, when we implemented in two provinces the PBO nets and two provinces the dual ITNs, what we've seen is on the first year of intervention, the malaria, the prevalence is going down, and also the incidence going down drastically. But in the second year, so we are not seeing the same result that we seen in the first year, and we see some reduction, but particularly in the PBO nets, dual alliance, showed that it was superior. It was the effective was more than 2 years. It was at least 2.5 years. In 2022, 2023, we did the same exercise to update the map risk, to update the intervention specific targets, to add some interventions, new intervention, for example, the chemio prevention, and did the same cost analysis, effectiveness, and the operational feasibility adjustments. And also, of course, we did some modeling to see what is the impact and also the cost. The result, it was to have these 3 maps that I want to show you. On the left, the first maps show that we call the core package is what we are doing until last year, just to have a alliance in all provinces except Maputo province, where we have the just IRS. And on top of that, we have in some areas some IRS in 2 high burden provinces, Zambezia and Nampula, and in south of Mozambique you see in Manigaza and Inyambane, where we do have these Mosaswa and this Mosaswa initiative that is cross-border collaboration to eliminate malaria in SADC region. And the Core Plus, we call Core Plus package. In this package, we just add the SMC from Nampula Pro. We had one more province for SMC, it's Nampula and Niassa. We had one more province for the PMC, it's Zambezia. And the picture will be the same. We had just 2, SMC and PMC, and in some place we can add the vaccine, malaria vaccine. And lastly, on my right, we have the ideal package for Mozambique. This ideal package has alliance in all districts, can be dual alliance, and other parts we can have this the PBO nets, and then we do have some IRS in south of Mozambique in some areas, and also we do have the PMC and SMC and vaccine. Of course, the case management is it's obvious. It is in all these districts. And also we did some cost analysis to see the cost for 3 years and the cost for 8 years during the strategic plan implementation. For 3 years, you can see the cost is the variance from 300 millions to 500 millions. And for 8 years, we can see it from 1 billion to 1.6 billion. The reduction, if we implement the ideal package, we can see 49% of reduction for the incidence. What we have learned in all this process, one is the advocacy for increasing the resource and financial for certain intervention is invaluable globally, but local we must lead with evidence to maximize these impacts. We need to see what is the intervention available versus to flat on this decreasing resource, to do all this to available to make some rational decisions about the resource allocation. The second lesson is to managing the local politics. It's easier for us, for all or most of us to talk this tailoring intervention, this specific interventions. If you have one province with 23 districts, for example, and you can say, no, it's easier to have, it's just select 2 districts out of 23 and you deploy some intervention. It's very easy according to the data. It's easier to talk in forums like this. But when you go to the field, to the country, to the province, to the district, it's challenging to manage this, to inform the political leaders that in all these districts, so we have just selected 2 for intervention and we left the other 20 districts, for example. So what we are doing is we have to manage to educating the leaders. For example, we launched the new strategic plan with the Prime Minister in Mozambique. And I did the presentation and say to the Prime Minister, so this is the way how Mozambique, the NMCP will implement the strategy. Now our approach is not one size fits all. It's according to data. It's according to different situations in each district. So it's a process. So the Prime Minister was there and other political leaders was there and they listened to me and said, okay, so this is the approach that it's a process. So for the Prime Minister, we move to the governors, to the district authorities. So it's not easy to manage, but we are starting to on this process. And lastly, the third one is a strong analysis to data-driven strategic plan process. This is not a process that we can do, for example, in 1 or 2 or 3 months, but it's a long process, at least 6 months or 1 year, because we do have this data and we need to sit with all this technical expertise, the partners and the donors, okay, to make some consensus and also to integrate and to make better decisions according to what we have. And this is not, we cannot see it as a academic exercise, but it can be something that can fit, that we can use in the country. So thank you once again for the opportunity and muito obrigado.
Thank you so much. So the main theme that has been transpiring through the presentations is really that the decision-making process is data-driven. So we're going to the next presentation, and I think it's a good time to have our monitoring and evaluation guru, Molly, to come and talk about how to use routine data to assess the performance of ITN. Over to you, Molly.
Thank you so much, Giovanni. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I know that I am between you guys and lunch, so I will try to be quick. It is really good to see everyone. It's been a long time for some of you. I am Molly Robertson. I am currently with the Global Fund, and I work on subnational tailoring at the Global Fund. So very relevant to the topic here today. And we're going to talk a little bit about subnational tailoring. I'm also going to be wearing 2 different hats, actually, so in 3 hats, because that one at the Global Fund. But I'm also wearing a hat as a former director of the pilot evaluations for the New Nets project. So that we're going to go through some of that methodology with you guys and just look at how routine data and the data that you already have can really inform some of the ways that you make decisions about ITN deployment. And then I'm going to talk from my hat of the RBM Surveillance Monitoring and Evaluation Reference Group, the SMERG, and go through some guidance that was developed with PATH, with AMP, with other partners on how you can really operationalize some of these evaluations, how you budget for them, and how you staff them. So what I really want to do first is give an overview of the New Nets project. I am not giving an overview of results. Andrew did that really well. What I really want to talk about is how the projects itself were set up and the importance of using routine data, the data that you already have, to really look at some of these deployments. As Medard said, you fit the evaluation parameters to the campaign. Sometimes you don't necessarily fit the campaign to the evaluation. I think that was a very important point to reiterate. And as Dr. Candrinho was saying, really looking at prioritization, looking at your own data to be able to see that prioritization is important. From the subnational tailoring aspect, I think as we start to look at how we do district level and granular deployment, having really strong routine data is going to be very important. Okay, so this is just a quick overview of the NewNet's project partners. A lot of partners, many countries were involved in really setting this up and saying that they, really looking at their own data to see where to set up these new nets, and then we could really look at the impact of the new nets. So what really happened in looking at the pilot evaluations, these were pilots to be done in real operational conditions. So these nets were pushed out as nets normally are for campaigns. And then there were different types of data that were both already there and especially created for this. So first is the epidemiology. Of course, you want to know what the burden is and what it becomes. So prevalence surveys, community surveys, incidents through health facilities, also at community level in some cases. Importantly, in a few countries, we also looked at prevalence in antenatal care, testing every woman who's coming in for their first visit. We paired this also with entomology, so really understanding the entomological situation in each of these districts. And one of the important things that I'm going to point out to you is the pairing of this entomology with the anthropological data. So we understand not only vector behavior and when vectors are biting, but also human behavior and when humans are using the nets and they're sleeping. So what are some of those risk times? Durability monitoring, obviously very important, and while not completely routine, something that people have often information on. I think the least routine out of all of this is cost effectiveness data. I think we all have work to do in this area to really pull in some measures of cost effectiveness data to really see with our routine data how to determine what will be most cost effective in countries. So this is just a look at where the pilot evaluations took place, that it was standard ITNs, IG2, PBO, Royal Guard, and then standard plus IRS in one part of Rwanda. So just to go over the epidemiology again, the ANC-based surveillance. So the testing was incorporated into the first ANC visits. Every woman who came to the first ANC visit was tested. This was a continuous data collection. We had it monthly, and this was RDT confirmed prevalence. Then we built in cross-sectional surveys. So these were household surveys that asked the standard DHS MIS questions, plus some questions on durability monitoring. This was only annual, and it was also RDT confirmed prevalence. And then collection of data at health facilities. This was a continuous data collection based on RDTs at the health facilities and in some cases community, and we could distinguish that. And I can't get to my next slide, sorry. Oops, okay. This is just a really quick one to go over. We don't need to go into real details, but it's really important to look at the ANC surveillance. I think this is a new area that we're really looking into in terms of giving more information on a routine basis so that you can make decisions at a granular level. I think we all know prevalence surveys are often powered at a provincial level. You don't have that type of granularity to make decisions at a district level or see what happened if you do a district level deployment. So this is just looking at the ANC surveillance in Burkina Faso and what we saw month to month in terms of prevalence in Burkina Faso. And then you see at the bottom, this is overlaid with the cross-sectional survey prevalence data. So this was done in a number of places. Imperial College has been working on modeling out what the correlation is. I think it is very important to think about this as a possible data strategy, and that one of the things to consider is how you need to build that correlation in for your own country. Now, the human vector interaction, again, a very important piece to this, to be able to understand really where interventions are going to have their most impact. So we have our routine entomological surveillance, which are either human landing catches, in some cases, pyrethrum spray catches. And then there is indirect monitoring of ITN use. So this is really where the collectors, the entomological collectors, actually collect human behavior data as well as the entomological data, so you can understand when and how people are using their nets. So this is just a quick overview of what this looks like. So we have in Mozambique, we have in northern and western Mozambique, all of the biting times from the human landing collections in these graphs here. To the left and to the right, you have graphs of the percent of people asleep and out of a net, awake and out of a net, people under a net. So you really get a sense of when people are using those nets and when the mosquitoes are biting. So what does that do? When you put that all together, it really gives you a sense of where some of the riskiest places are, in your country, in your districts. In terms of making decisions district by district, this could be a really important factor. So in the pink are the bites protected from the ITN. In the darker pink, orange perhaps, are the bites unprotected while asleep, and then the bites unprotected while awake. So you can see that pairing these data times, it looks very different outcomes for different districts. How people use their net when the mosquitoes are biting, pairing those two is potentially very important. And one of those things that you can build into routine data and really understand, what you need to do in terms of deployment. So the human behavior aspect of this was not only these pieces on net use, but also getting into more information, using focus groups, in-depth interviews, participant observation, to understand access, net use, barriers to use, all of those things that you really need to understand when you're deploying your nets, especially as you're switching ITN types. So all of that information was built in too, but the pairing of that information I think is very powerful. So these are just everybody I'd like to acknowledge on this slide. That was with my PATH hat. So now I'm going to move to talking about how you would set up this with your routine data, what kinds of structures you need and what kinds of personnel you need to be able to set up these type of evaluations on a regular basis. And with that, I'm going to have my smirk hat on. But it's still going to be past slides. Oops. The pointer, okay. Okay. That's that one. There should be a separate section. All right, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get the slides out, so I'm just going to talk through it. So Giovanni's like, yes. So in collaboration with AMP, with PATH, with the SMERG, I'm gonna forget other people, but it is a very collaborative effort. We set up some guides on how to really staff up to conduct these evaluations. So it's not so much how to, the meat of how to do the evaluations. There's plenty of guidance out there. We have links to that in the document. This is a live document that's on the AMP website, and we can provide that website to everybody. It's really thinking about what kind of people do you need? What are the roles and responsibilities of the people that you need? How do you start to pull in all of this data? Who's going to do that? Who's going to manage it? So it's really more of an operational guide. How do you really run these evaluations? How do you staff up for these evaluations? So I would go over all of the pieces to that, but you can find this in guidance on the AMP website. And perhaps later on we can go through that piece if people are interested. So with that, I will just wrap up by saying that out of all of the presentations you've heard here today, understanding all of the different products that are coming to market, understanding the complications we have, understanding the heterogeneity in all of the districts within your country, that really getting to the meat of how to use routine data, really putting emphasis on data quality and ensuring data quality and really bolstering that will help to be able to make some of these decisions, to be able to gather some of this data on a routine basis so that you don't have to wait for large studies to come through to really have important data at your hands to make decisions on where to deploy all of these new products. So with that, thank you very much.
That's a well-packed session, right? So we're going to move to the Q&A. People in the room who have questions, please raise your hand, get the mic, introduce yourself, and ask the question.
Hi, thank you. A couple of questions. One for Medad. You mentioned there are issues with QA/QC of new nets, and I just wanted to understand what those were. And then to either Lilia or Patrick, one of the recommendations that came out was use the best net, but are you referring to clofenapir, pyrethroid ITNs, and then what does that mean for any sort of rotational resistance issues? Because if we're just using one AI or additional to a pyrethroid, is that going to be managed, or what is your vision for that being managed?
Who was asking the question? Could you introduce yourself?
It's Angus Spears from I2I.
Hi, Sid Rupani, Global Fund Supply Chain Team. Question for Molly, but generally for the group, is when we talk about subnational tailoring, what are the levers that we can use to tailor? So we can tailor type of net or the set of interventions, but what else can we tailor? What's in our control when we say tailoring?
Peter from Tanzania, NMCP. I was asking the question to Medad concerning the universal campaign. He was explaining that they take place at a country-wise, but I was keen to know for how long does this campaign take? Because Uganda is a large country. So, and how can you come now to evaluate one to see the impact of the mass campaign, and how do you manage the timing? One of the issue in terms of mass campaign is about timing and the completeness of the campaign. By when are you going to complete? But also my other comments about the contamination from the routine distributions. So I don't know for our fellow NMCP, you do, because if we are distributing a standard net or PBO nets using the routine in a particular subnation or council, how can you mix again with another new types of net with using the same, using another
mass campaign. So I don't know if really we want to come up and do evaluation, you can really find a good thing or result which can just make sense. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is D. Levi Hine. I'm from Liberia, NMCP. Many thanks to all the presenters for your very elaborate presentation. Well, my interest is with the Ugandan team and the Mozambican team, especially on the political will. Uganda stress very strong political will. But I don't know how mainstream that is at the subnational level, because sometimes you have the will at the top, and just to emphasize on that, in Mozambique, they are talking about managing political politics, local politics, in terms of the implementation. So I'd like to have a further elaboration on those two. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Altaf. I'm from Malaria Control, Pakistan. I have a question from Dr. Jimmy and his team. As he mentioned during the presentation regarding the procurement monitoring from the order placement till the warehouse delivery. My question is how the program is managing the checks and procedures to ensure the getting the LLINs on time, and also the nets are delivered in the required quantity and quality assured products in your warehouse. Thank you.
So thanks to all the presenters. I think it was very interesting. I have a question for Dr. Candrino, if he's online. Great presentation. Lovely to see all the data. One of the things that shows there is that you have different interventions, but I wondered how much your data was used to take decisions on channels. So does your data support a move away from mass campaigns? Are you switching into continuous distribution? So it'd just be good to hear within that whole mapping and intervention mix, whether the channels were also decided. Thanks.
Thank you. Panelists, over to you before going to Candrino, so you can respond to Mercy's question.
Thank you. We'll take the questions on behalf of MEDAD. Starting with the challenges in quality control. In country, there are bodies which manage product quality. It can be the pharmaceutical authority. It can be the consumer good authority. In the case of mosquito nets, because it is a textile, the regulator of textiles plays a role, but also because it contains a chemical, then the pharmaceutical bodies also play a role. What is happening is, first, especially the one of textiles, they define some standards, which sometimes are regional standards, in our case, East African standards. Now, when industry is working on new products, the regulators are behind. So by the time we want to bring these products, we need to engage them in advance. And in some cases, they have not developed the standards against, they have not adopted these standards. Our luck is MEDAD happens to sit on the board for especially the textile part. So we can influence the agenda to make sure that some standards are developed in advance. When it does not fit in their schedule, then we write to request the importation of these products as experimental products, as study products. Otherwise, then they cannot be cleared. With the chemical part, you know, they need to acquire the technology, the chemicals for testing, and most often they are behind industry. And we need also to inform them in advance the products we are getting, what are their chemical profiles, so that they send their lab people for updates and acquire the capabilities to do this. This requires one to have a good outlook of actually supply chain management, and you know all the bottlenecks and how long each of them take, those rate limiting steps, and you intervene in time, otherwise the products cannot come. Related to that, contamination management. Now this comes to warehouse management and also transportation management. So you need to engage the warehouse people in advance, and you need to give them the volumes, the space each of these will need for their own planning of space, so that it is efficient, you know, and so that they don't have half-empty warehouses, and it becomes very costly for them as well. Now, the transportation also, you need to plan the routings properly. And that is also influenced by the placement of these nets. The volumes you are sending to a particular place, does it fit in a truck? What size of truck? Will it be appropriate, efficient for the transport agency? So these all have to be looked into very carefully. Otherwise, then they cannot make it. They have to send a route for just a very small quantity. Yet it's not only a truck, there's human resource involved. There are several things involved. And that comes to when we must incorporate studies, and studies are randomizing. So what should be the randomization size? Should it be a village, a parish, a sub-county? And what could be the sizes of all this in terms of logistics management? So you need to be a little bit all round to be able to lead this process, so that it's not very silo. Because the study people sometimes are not aware about the implications of displacement to these different things. Okay, that is on contamination. Then the next one is how do we beat the time? Because all these things take time. Now, since at the moment mass distributions are 3-year cycles, what we do as soon as we finish one, we do a lessons learned, and we start macro planning. Okay, because in macro planning, you decide quantities, types, and you start discussing with those stakeholders. Because each type will have a different price. It will, because you are doing stratified deployment, you need to negotiate what Mozambique has just said, why you want to place this where. But also, is industry able to make that volume? Are they not overcommitted in another location? So you are also speaking with the industry, with the funder, with the academic institutions. This takes more than a year, macro planning. The next year is procurement, and then the production, shipping. It also takes a whole year. And if you miss this, you cannot run the campaign in the 3rd year. Okay? So you must start early 1 year for stakeholder engagement, looking at evidence, looking at placement, harmonizing all the interests, those who want to do studies, those who want to produce, those who want a certain design, a whole year process, several meetings, several calls. Then you come to the procurement. Okay? So that the 3rd year now in the 3rd year also, as you are making the waiving plan, you need to be aware about when industry will make this thing available to you. So ideally, we are supposed to plan the waves according to aging of nets. Okay, or a malaria situation when you have epidemic in a place you may want to put there first. But this cannot happen because then the product will not be available. Okay, so you have to factor in other considerations to decide who receives first. But then you need to then handle the politics, the question of the politics. Why is our wave coming at the end of the year? You know, so this also you have to constantly explain that we want to give you special type of nets. They are not available at this time. They will be available 6 months later. But then now, how do you manage operations in a patchy way? Yet operations are more efficient if you do it in a contiguous manner so that you deploy capacity in one direction and move to the next one. In case there are reverse logistics required, and from this wave you are going to another place, you need to bring them back to the center. So also, so the waving plan is a living document. Each time you go to engage stakeholders, you will propose a new one because suppliers have adjusted landing dates. Okay, then we need to work very closely with the shipping agents, very closely. The good thing nowadays with technology, they can keep telling you where the nets have reached. And you know all the timelines, where how long the clearance can be at the port, how long the regulators will. And what we do, we engage the regulators in advance. And our biggest tool is conditional release. And where especially the producers said we have done our internal control, should this thing fail, they are ready to do a withdrawal. You convince the regulators that you leave this product, move for us to fit in our time. I think, yeah, how we manage the politics, I think program managers, beyond being epidemiologists, you need good leadership skills, negotiation skills, communication skills to deal with this. Otherwise, it is known program managers don't survive a campaign. You will be changed during that time. You don't survive it unless you know how to play the game and engage stakeholders. Thank you.
A question.
Yeah, sure. Okay. What levers or subnational? So thanks. That great question on what else can we tailor. So oftentimes I think subnational tailoring, as we've talked about it kind of broadly, globally, has really been about intervention mixes and where to put intervention mixes. It is not just that. Really, subnational tailoring is data for decision-making, things you do all the time anyways. What we have now, we're in a very data-rich world. We have better data, quicker data in which you can make decisions on a routine basis. So subnational tailoring should not be thought of as intervention mixes that you think about, in your national strategic plan. It can also be where is the data quality, where are data quality problems? Instead of sending out data quality assurance visits everywhere, how do we tailor that and really drive down into those areas that have more problems? And you can see that, you have the data to see that. So how do we drive that? How do we look at case management? We know that case management quality is still a problem, but it's not a problem everywhere. So how do we really think about how to use the data we have now to drive down into case management quality, to be able to send supervision visits, to be able to send improvement products to those facilities that need them now, and as well as things like SBCC. We know that there are areas that have particular problems with use, with coverage issues for LLINs. How do we really tailor that? So it is not just about where the intervention goes broadly. but it's also about how we look at that intervention as it is deployed and afterwards, because we have that kind of rich information. We have to look at the surveillance, make sure we know what is quality in surveillance, and we really troubleshoot those areas that need more, and case management quality, because that is also going to tie in well to being able to have quality surveillance data. So I think that this will become more and more discussed. I think this first discussion of subnational tailoring, we've really emphasized intervention mixes and modeling, but I think now we need to make a huge push to understanding how to use the data we have routinely to really target the interventions in the best way. We know that what the districts know often what the problems are. We just need to figure out a way to help solve those problems in real time at a granular level in the districts themselves. Thank you.
Dr. Condrino on the line. You want to?
No, he's not responding to our messages, so you can go ahead.
Okay, so I think. So Marcy, I think we will follow up, but I think that's really important, is not just the type of nets, but the type of channels. That was your question, right? So we'll follow up. I didn't quite catch Angus's question. Maybe we can talk more during lunch, but what I heard was in terms of considerations for rotation in terms of managing insecticide resistance. And I think just piggybacking maybe Molly on some of your points in terms of and that's why I think underscoring both Global Fund and PMI really continuing to invest in entomological monitoring. I think some years ago, as we were just starting to look at PBO nets and supporting PBO nets,
Speed up development. Different ITN types between successive campaigns may be more beneficial for insecticide resistance management. Did you get that one?
It's a very loaded question, but if I understood you, I think we'll just go back to basics, which is what we have recommended always. Let's continue to strengthen entomological surveillance and insecticide resistance monitoring at country level. And let's continue to use our data to inform choices of what we do, which I think the purpose of the morning presentations were at country level. And lastly, I think both Global Fund and PMI, as we have indicated, we are very supportive of supporting countries on your proposals, which are evidenced by data. So I think we'll leave it at that. And since it's very complex, we can discuss the other things later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last question before lunch? Any last question before we close the morning session? Good. If there's no any other question, I would like you to acknowledge and appreciate the presentations and the presenters. Thank you so much. And just to let you know, all the presentations will be uploaded on the MP website and available by end of the day tomorrow. As for the lunch, we have a lunch session here on waste management and end of life nets. We grab our lunch and come back in this room where we have our colleagues, Jessica and Joe, to take us through the waste management and end of life nets, as this is a very, one of the really hard challenges that country are facing when organizing and managing the campaigns. Over, thank you so much. Good done. Done.
One, two, check, check. 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.